In the Commonwealth, science and invention, with little to no regard for the cost in human life, is pretty common. Disturbingly so, actually. And this was before the world went on fire. We come across examples of this time and time again, some to far more extremes than others. Yeah, Vault-Tec, we're looking at you, but then, aren't we always? But sometimes another company or person steps forward, proudly pounds their chest, says, "Hold my beer," and pulls a total blinder, either in the possible cost of human life the fruits of their research could accrue, the actual cost in the process of said research, or just how they treated their employees while doing it. And some are just examples of really irresponsible ways to handle or get rid of that technology when things don't work out the way they want. Today we take a look at a brave young woman who made herself her own test subject to perfect her research, injecting herself with God knows what. We look at an arms manufacturing company that's more than a little in the red, and due to this, has resorted to some pretty deplorable and duplicitous means to get their products to work, and seems to be staffed by at least half of a circus. We see how an aviation company goes too far to meet their government deliverables, letting paranoia run rampant and costing someone their life. In an old junkyard, we get an excellent scaled-up robotics equivalent of don't throw away batteries and other dangerous electronics into a dump site. This act may have killed someone, and gives us a secret ally. Lastly, we see how a well-intentioned decision to protect lives can lead to a rapidly escalating Lord of the Flies-like situation, resulting in almost everyone dying, or possibly everybody. But at least the research got done. All of this today in this lovely long video. These longer videos do take a lot more time to make, as you all know, so any support in the form of likes and comments really help the overlords of YouTube look favourably upon this video. If there are any other longer form videos covering multiple areas like this you'd like to see, please tell me in the comments or in my community posts. If my voice is a little off, I'm recording this while recovering from the flu, so I hope it doesn't sound too bad. Now, let's take a gander at these lovely instances of pre-war research. The first place we want to take a look at is a smaller one, an unmarked location tucked in a back alley to the south of Bunker Hill. Here we can find an unassuming house that, like many others, you just walk by, maybe throw a brick through their window, but the story inside's pretty horrific, and shows how far someone would go for the sake of their work. As we approach the house, we do encounter the neighbourhood watch, now ghouls, and these are only the beginning. On the porch to the left are two skeletons, a man and a woman. They look pre-war, as if they died on this couch when the bombs hit. However, the bag beside them might belong to them, so that could indicate they survived the initial blast and then expired sometime after. I think they might have a relation to the person, or what's left of them anyway, who resides in this house, if that is who they are, but we need to head inside to find out more. When we enter, the ghouls start attacking us. It's clear from them and the fungi that this house is, or at some point in the past was, more radiated. Although our Geiger counter gives us nothing, but the thing we find upstairs likely explains their presence here, as they do in a lot of places where we find ghouls being lazy and sleeping the day away. Although oddly enough, while some of them are alive, on this floor at least, we do find some are dead. This isn't rare, but it's also somewhat uncommon. Generally, either all the ghouls are up and kicking, you that is, or they're dead. Especially if it's somewhere isolated like this. The rest of the floor is pretty ramshackled, with fungus growing and the rest of the place looking pretty tossed. Part of the ceiling is collapsed as well, so in theory, this could have taken out one or more of the ghouls, which is pretty funny if it did. But apart from all that, the place is unremarkable. The only other thing of interest here is the holotape we can find beside the stove, titled Control Subjects Recording, 1 of 3.
Entry 3, recorded by Research Assistant Peters on February 26, 2077. Time, it's 12:35 hours. Subject's direct radiation exposure level increased to 2 sieverts per 24 hours. Intravenous fluid intake increased to 1 liter. Subject reports localized pain in frontal and parietal lobe, accompanied by severe nausea, with vomiting on average, 3 to 6 instances per 12 hours. Solid food no longer viable by oral intake. Other symptoms include general weakness in limbs, bleeding of gums, severe abdominal cramps, and diarrhea. Dark stool indicates possibility of intestinal bleeding. Shortness of breath also an issue. I will now describe changes in mood, or thought process. I have never in my life felt as horrible as I do right now. The discomfort is almost too much to bear. I often contemplate termination of this trial. But I know I know it'll only be a few more days before I reach 6 sieverts. Then I can administer the serum. We'll get our contract renewed. The serum will go to the market, and it's going to help people. It's really going to change the way we live. And me, I'll be... fine. I'll be fine. Cyclical thoughts. No other developments to report.
Well, we're off to a strong start. Someone's experimenting on themselves. Great, that never goes wrong. This person's called Peters, first name unknown, and they're a research assistant with some group. We can't be sure which, as we never actually get the details. This is presumably the start of the trial, given the numbering on the tapes, and it occurs on the 27th of February, quite a long time before the bombs drop, which is very important. She's slowly increasing her level of radiation exposure, with a goal to be exposed to triple what she is on right now, so that she can use some serum on herself. She never actually tells us what it is, but given it seems to require the subject to be irradiated to determine if it's having an effect, I think it's safe to assume it was some work related to radiation exposure, or poisoning. We'll need to get the other tapes first. She describes her symptoms as follows: pain in her frontal and parietal lobe, constant vomiting, which seems to have been the reason that she can't take in solid food, loss of strength, bleeding of the gums, and abdominal pain, which may indicate intestinal bleeding, but also diarrhea. Just add to the indignity of it all. So general symptoms of radiation poisoning, not good. She's also having trouble breathing. Now the reason she seems determined to power through all this is because the funding for the group she works for is looking pretty shaky, likely because they were unable to show that this was actually going to work, which she wants to prove. But we need to keep exploring to find out how this turned out. Heading up the stairs, we encounter a few more ghouls and see this floor is, like the one below, slightly banjaxed. Here we can find 2 bedrooms. One of them's a child's bedroom, going off the single bed and the toys inside, complete with a demonic Jangles the Moon Monkey. Or it was someone living with their parents as an adult, which for the 1950s, i.e. the 2070s in Fallout, meant they were a failure. Unlike these days, where it's literally the only way some people can get a roof over their heads. Now these bedrooms will be important later when we try and figure out exactly where we are, or at the least what this place was to the person here. On the dresser beside what I assume was the parents' bed, we can find the second recording.
Entry 6, R.A. Peters. It's March 1st, the subject has reached saturation threshold safely. Taking measurement now. Confirm 6 sieverts. Rapid fluid loss due to fever. Left IV intake. All previous symptoms are still present. Tissue damage visible on arms, neck and hands. Necrotic sloughing of the skin. Topical and ingested antibiotics applied to control infection. Now injecting first dose of serum sample 42BA7 into bloodstream. No immediate effects observed. Animal trials yielded results in less than...
Now strangely enough, this is entry 6, but it's numbered the second one, and this did only occur a few days later, when they've reached the saturation of radiation that they need to begin their trial with the serum, a serum they call 42BA7. Necrosis has begun to affect their skin, and they're experiencing fluid loss like a witch in Oz. Already, you can begin to see where this is going. Apparently they had already begun animal trials, and in them, the serum did seem to have some results, so it worked to some degree, just not enough to secure their funding, or release it to market. At least now, we can be reasonably sure it was created to address radiation poisoning, although as we'll see, by continuing our exploration, this doesn't seem to have been successful. At the top of the house, we find another dead ghoul, and inside this locked room, we find our last ghoul, a glowing one. Bloated in our case, though I think this is just due to leveling. In here we get our last tape, so let's take a listen before we take a look around.
Second dose of sample 42BA7, injected hours ago. No effect. No effect. I contacted the lab to terminate this trial, but I need a doctor. Hang on. What's that? My teeth. Oh, several teeth dislodged. Feels like necrotic tissue damage throughout oral cavity. Serum is ineffective at toxic levels. Request to terminate trial was... Orders are to remain in quarantine for the duration of the experimental period. I understand. I'm going to die. That's obvious. It's right here. Our failure. If you would, Dr. Roberts, please deliver the following to my family. Mom, Dad, I love you. Yes, I volunteered for this. It sounds crazy, but I believed in it. There'll be nothing left worth bearing. Just no way. Oh, no. That's a bit too sentimental. Let me think about it.
Alright, so things are not going too well for Peters. We don't know how long it was until the second dose was administered, but let's assume it was probably daily at least. That implies this entry is just the next day after the previous one, and it's had no effects. The necrosis is spreading, and she's declared the trial a failure. Now thankfully, it seems she didn't just recklessly do this. Well, at least no more than she's already done. She volunteered, and people she was working with knew, specifically a Dr. Roberts. She has terminated the trial, but at this point she knows she's going to die. Remember, this serum was meant to be what treated this level of radiation exposure, implying that it's not feasible, or at least easy, to do so normally. They've told her to stay in quarantine for the duration of the trial, but we can't say how long that actually was meant to be, or where she actually was when this all happened. This brings us back to the core issue we need to discuss. Is this glowing one her? I've got a few videos on ghouls, and we have discussed them a lot over the years. The process of fertilization has a lot of factors involved, as does even ghoulification, from the amount of radiation to turn someone, the length of time to turn, whether they go feral, and how fast. Excluding bad writing, of course. We do know she wasn't turning feral. At this point she just seemed to be dying of radiation poisoning, and it was by no means a common thing, or even really a thing at all, that people just turned into ghouls when exposed to radiation pre-war. For the majority of the world, this was all new after the bombs dropped. For an incredibly small number, ghoulification was an induced process to give them immortality, although that's a whole other video. In her case, she just seems to be dying, and was expected to soon be dead. But if she did become a ghoul, why didn't no one know? Assuming these tapes were implanted here for some reason, this is where she decided to undergo treatment. Going off the other bedroom, and the fact she mentions no one else apart from her father and mother, this can be assumed to be her childhood home, not hers. Which means she decided to irradiate herself in her parents' house and then quarantine herself there as well. This might actually explain the two people on the couch out the front. These were her parents, who were waiting for their daughter to get out of quarantine, possibly so they could kill her themselves for stealing their house, which means they waited right up until they got cooked by atomic fire. All else aside, given the final tape, the parents didn't seem to know this. So did she just commandeer their house and not tell them why, and possibly irradiate it to the point of it being uninhabitable? This then raises the question of the timeline. If she did become a ghoul, was it before or after the bombs dropped? Because all this was in March, which leaves more than half a year until the world ends. In all that time, did no one come to check on her, to determine if she was still alive? One possibility is she wasn't feral, and since she wasn't dead, but still irradiated, she remained in quarantine. But this seems pretty unlikely. Someone would have had to have known. Also, how did she stay dying like this for long enough that no one was left to check on her? Excluding, of course, that she was just hated by her colleagues, so much that no one cared. I'm no expert, but I'm pretty sure that the degree of radiation poisoning she had is fatal in a relatively short frame of time. So this then leaves us with a puzzle of how she was just left here, feral or no, in a building that wasn't locked up before the bombs hit. Well, there is one option. The serum didn't treat the radiation. It turned her into a ghoul. She could have been turned, and then she either hid or was kept somewhere until the bombs hit. Then, given she was well adapted to survive, she thrived after the bombs hit. After this, given her parents were dead, maybe still the people on the porch, if they knew she was in quarantine, she gave up. She gave in to the despair that takes so many after they turn, and, slowly or swiftly, she became a feral. She was already irradiated before the bombs hit, so the extra radiation could have contributed in her becoming a glowing one. This likely explains why there are other ghouls in the house. They generally flock to glowing ones due to the radiation output. Whether Dr. Roberts knew the serum would do this to her, we don't know. We do know that induced ghoulification was a science that had been cracked shortly before the war, so it is possible they were looking into it as well. Or she just managed to survive long enough to turn, which means she experienced an even worse fate than slowly dying of radiation poisoning. If the serum was meant to turn her into a ghoul, and she didn't know, then she could have been kept here against her will after she turned. Then it was only after the world burned that she got some freedom. Although again, everyone was dead, so what's the point? It begs the question, if this was the case, was Dr. Roberts the one who turned Eddie Winters? And possibly Calvert from Point Lookout. The only other option is she's long dead, and the increased radiation levels in the house attracted the ghouls, one of which, over time, became a glowing one. In the end, we may never know. Now given we had a very depressing story, with a very depressing end, let's move on to a happier one. And by that I mean relatively happier. It's still really bad by ordinary moral standards, and someone still dies a horrific death. Don't you worry. We will now take a look at Arcjet Systems, a location that makes me feel incredibly old, as it's almost been 10 years since my last video covering this place. Sweet Jesus, I am so old now. The outside's actually pretty tame by our standards. No super mutant gore bags, no corpses hung from spikes by raiders trying to scare you off. Just some old cars and a pretty cool logo. Also a lot of crows, and given what we find inside, well, it feeds back into a certain theory that gets floated around about crows every now and again. It's looking a little run down, and out the back we can actually find an elevator that takes us to the more interesting part of this place, although that's actually locked when we first arrive. So let's get inside and see what's going on here. Immediately, the foyer isn't looking too bad, apart from all the collapsed stairways and destroyed spaces in the walls that I assume were showing off advanced equipment. There's actually a terminal just in the reception area to the left here, but we have to go through the whole facility to get to it, and it will make more sense in the context of what we find as we move through this place. Going through the door at the end of the foyer, on the right, we find a very interesting room. It is filled with slaughtered protectrons. Poor little guys. Now on its own, this seems normal enough. We are, after all, a total animal. But this actually wasn't us, which is why we can't interact with a lot of these bodies. Something else destroyed all of them. Something we're not going to encounter for a little while yet. Also in here is the first terminal that begins fleshing out the story here. We can see that this is the security office, which makes sense given the protectrons. There are 3 entries, the first of which is security concerns. It's from the CEO of Arcjet, Thomas Reinhardt, and he's asking the security team to implement some sort of new security measures. This is because the company, for the first time, has a United States Space Association contract, a contract for the development of something called the XMB Booster engine, which, given who the contract is for, is likely a rocket booster of some sort. Among other things, he wants automated security measures, which means turrets, and from here that's only going to get worse. The only reasonable thing he's asked for is a better form of password reset than milling out the new passwords. This is, as many of you know, incredibly insecure, so good on him. Next up is turrets, and yes, it literally is about this awful security measure. Sam Brent, who seems to be the new consultant they hired, is telling everyone to wear an ID badge or get capped. Yes, they're using an, allegedly, low-yield isotope to indicate the person in question is not a target, but I imagine this would be worn on the belt or the chest, and it will surely do wonders for your lungs and or reproductive organs. Now from the rest of the email, this appears to only be near the engine core entrance, but we see turrets everywhere, so this is not the case. Also, 2 things. 1, why do they have to sign up? Surely these badges need to be a mandatory thing to be handed out, or else they'd have a hard time claiming they aren't liable. 2, why can't they use the same target identification the protectrons use? You know, the one you can change from terminals to alter who's friendly. Just a weird solution. The final entry is about an engine core accident. Yeah, that's right. Everything hit the fan and we're only 1 terminal in. Outstanding. So apparently, a member of the press managed to get all the way to the engine core, despite the overkill they had with respect to security measures. Now this was called an accident, and Thomas is telling Sam to make it all go away, or else someone is taking the fall. Given all of this, it's clear the reporter was either badly injured, and they want them killed and disposed of, or killed, and they want the body, and any evidence, disposed of along with it. I'm not really sure why either of these things have to be done, as the reporter's the one trespassing on private property, where government R&D was being carried out. But hey, this is Fallout. Companies are usually very evil, and don't make great decisions. So overall, we have a paranoid company that is semi-okay with its workers being shot at by turrets to protect its government R&D project, and someone has already died. Maybe. Off to a great start here, so let's keep going. Just past the security office, we find this disgusting room. It has a urinal inside but no sink, and looks to be the janitor's closet. It's good to know that the person in charge of cleaning the place likely had filthy hands. Past it, we can head on through a few rundown offices and down a corridor, where we emerge into a fairly large room. Inside this room, our foe is revealed to us. Synths. A bejesus load of synths. Thankfully, locked behind a large door that we need to open to get further in. But yes, the culprits who wrecked all those protectrons are better robots, or perhaps androids is the more appropriate phrase. The room itself is also wrecked, with parts of the ceiling having caved in, along with a corridor at the far end. But on the upside, we get more terminals here to continue piecing the story together. The first one, to the right of the entrance to the room, tells us this is the prototype testing lab, and the first entry is about the now updated password security protocols. Apparently the solution was, instead of changing them outright automatically, they just sent a reminder. If you then don't change the passwords, then you face a variety of consequences. I suppose staff are more likely to take this seriously, given they could have been killed if they didn't sign up for a badge. The entry after is the old password reset system, or at least I assume it is. They seem to have implemented this once every 3 months, which is odd, as the previous one suggests it's once a year. But this implies these changes were only put in place just before the bombs fell, as the old system was still mailing out passwords, and they were still valid. Additionally, the penalties that were spoken of in the previous email mustn't be automated, as the terminal would have been locked down then, given this older password. The second terminal is what the password in question gives access to. Now the lab controls tell us that they cannot connect to the prototype in question, whatever the prototype is, but the security door still works, allowing the synths to pour in and start the long fight we have to engage in to get through here. Given the raised dais in the back of the room, and this lab was for testing prototypes, I assume this was the prototype, as the actual booster we find later will be far too large to test in here. Therefore this is something else, possibly not even related to the booster, as we know there are a few other projects in the works here, as we'll read about soon. Past this room, through a hole in the wall to the right, we move deeper into the facility and come to a room with a collapsed upper floor. Along with this, we start to get mobbed by more synths, which doesn't change as we go deeper in. Heading up to the first floor, we start to see the posters about espionage and spies a lot more frequently. This remains a common sight as we move deeper in, almost like it's reflecting the paranoia that was creeping into this place, the extent of which is only just being shown to us. It gets a lot worse. We can also see more equipment that one would associate with an R&D facility, and the terminal entries we begin to find here confirm this section of the facility was devoted to this, the first of which can be found in this room. The terminal informs us that this is the 5th lab of the facility, and the first set of entries are about the fuel mixture for the booster engine we've started to hear about. A researcher we don't know the name of is trying to persuade Dr. McClellan to switch from uranium to deuterium, which at the very least tells us the booster is in fact fusion-based. No reason it would just be fission-based. This researcher thinks it would lead to efficiency improvements, even if the project deadline has to be pushed back. As we'll see later, this is a big issue, given all that is going on behind the scenes. But even now, the work week is already 7 days, so at this point, things are not great. The second entry seems to indicate that whatever they were trying to achieve with these efficiency gains worked, as at least Dr. McClellan was satisfied. However, Reinhardt rejected the idea of increasing the project timeline. The why becomes clear later. We do, however, get the very interesting information that this was all to put astronauts on Mars, which, I mean, that's a pretty big goal. This somewhat explains the paranoia and the secrecy, as this is definitely a nod to the space race, with Mars instead of the Moon, as there's already a war going on up there, to some degree. The extension would have required 3 months, which is a lot, but not an incredibly long period of time. They seem to have had enough, and wish to leave Arcjet when they're done. The next 2 reports are on the deep range transmitter. This research states the fuel issue has been solved. Now, this is a little confusing, as this didn't sound like a problem to be solved, but just an improvement they came up with. Additionally, the proposal wasn't accepted, so after all that hard work, it just ended up getting shelved. They've been moved on to this transmitter project because of their complaints. Or at least that's their belief in the matter. It could just be they're a lot worse than they actually think they are, and people just don't want to work with them. Who knows? The project just seems to be to improve the range of a transmitter, which may or may not be for the booster. We don't know yet. It'll apparently take them a month to do so. Honestly, I'd caution against them recording all these complaints in the company computers. But hey, they're long dead, so either way, they're beyond the long arm of HR. Also, Fallout has a proud history of people recording some pretty grievous stuff against their employees on the computers their employees own. So yes, this type of idiocy is all too familiar to us. The final entry updates us that it only took 3 weeks, and they've improved it by 70%, not just 50%. It also confirms the transmitter is for a spacecraft, although whether it's only for the ship the booster was intended for, or others, we don't know. All that's left is a scale down the size. The problem's going to come up again later with respect to the project deadlines, so if this was meant for the ship, it makes sense this would be a priority for them so early on. I'm assuming they never got the chance to move back to the project that actually interested them. So there we go. Arcjet was building a booster engine, fusion-based it would seem, to take a crew to Mars. From the earlier comments we read, and the ones in these entries, time constraints were definitely an issue, which makes sense given this was their first contract, and they'd want to deliver on it well. Heading down into the destroyed room again, we can cross the atrium and head upstairs, past several areas with caved-in roofs. Here we come to a room with, yes, you guessed it, another large section of the room collapsed into it, but the roof itself just looks fine. Got to love level design, right? But most importantly, we can find another terminal here to continue the story. This is Thomas Reinhardt's personal journal, and as you can see, there is a shed load of them, so strap in as we have a lot to get through here. They are all on the Mars Shot project, with the first being from August 2075. In it details his initial gamble with the XMB Booster. He actually got his team to start working on the project even before the USSA had even assigned them the contract for the project, implying there were probably other bidders. It also confirms the deep range transmitter was part of that project. Additionally, this means they already had some degree of work under their belt of the project when they started it, which actually makes the deadline problems we'll soon see even worse. It never actually says how much of the 6 months they spent working on it. He also implies that their company is in fact not a massive name in the field, and hopes the project will change that. The entry 1 month later tells us who the Dr. McClellan referenced in the previous terminal was. A Dr. Rory McClellan, who was brought in to spearhead the project given his expertise in nuclear propulsion. He previously worked as a military contractor, and they paid a lot of money to get him. They expect him to be able to meet the deadline of July 2077 at the latest, which is just under 2 years from their bid approval, although given they apparently started work as early as 6 months before the project was approved, maybe this isn't so insane. After this entry, we get one more from 3 months later, in December, and all is looking well. Now apparently back in July they were struggling, which means maybe this project really was their saving grace. It also means the move to start work before they got the contract was an even riskier one. But maybe it wouldn't have mattered. If they didn't get this project, it seems like their company would have been finished. Now he already seems very happy things are on schedule, but this seems premature as they're only 3 or 4 months in, and this is with the grace period of having already started a lot of work on the project. So this entry ends on a happy note, which of course means it's all about to go pear-shaped. The fourth entry, taking place in March of 2076, is when the first signs of trouble begin. There are apparently weight restrictions on the booster, which, I mean, yes, obviously that would be the case. It is a rocket booster, but he makes it sound like this is new information. Or at the very least, it somehow only became apparent that there are hundreds of tons over? Jesus. Which, I mean, that's either really bad engineering on their part, or the USSA dropped the ball as the client and gave them the wrong specs. They're a month behind schedule now, which given their tight deadlines is probably the reason he's worried. Seems like if the uranium was the problem, that switch to deuterium may have helped, but that sounded more like a fuel issue and less a subsystem one, so who knows. Entry 5 takes place 4 months later, and Arcjet is having trouble keeping all these plates spinning. Given its likeness to the space race, the publicity for the project is starting, and Arcjet is having to lie a lot. They can't give any hard deadlines, as they don't know when it'll all be sorted. Although the wait is still an issue, 4 months on. It's a bit of a mystery how the project hasn't already been scrapped, as surely this is a bit of a blocker for any future investment on the USSA's part. This interest in the press hints at the possible cause to the incident we heard about before, and we'll find out more about it soon. 4 months on again, in November, and the crisis seems somewhat averted. The weight problem's been fixed. Allegedly. It's actually a pretty close thing, as we'll see. They plan to test fires in the new year, which is good as they've only got 7 months of runway left before they meet the agreed on deliverable date. So once again, the year seems to end on a nice note. But don't you worry, it again goes pear-shaped quite quickly. The next entry is 3 months later in February of 2077, and they're going to finally test fire the booster. This is presumably at the behest of the USSA, who have, at this point, spent half a year on the publicity for this project, and now they can stop lying. We get to see later the room where they test fired. As spoiler, the booster never made it out of the facility, so things are still looking pretty good, but then thankfully for us, disaster strikes in the next entry. It's in the following month, but only 2 weeks after the previous entry, as this accident happened before the test firing, so possibly on the same day as the previous entry. Somehow, someone from the press managed to get past all the security measures they had in place and make it all the way down to the engine core a few hours before the test. Dr. McClellan was running a small test and the photographer got incinerated, quite thoroughly. No one apart from Brent and Reinhardt seemed to know anything about it. although it's not too clear how they found out and how other people, as we'll see, took longer. I assume they just went ahead with the events, as they make no mention of having cancelled it, so they seem to be in the clear. But again, no idea why they'd be liable. It was a government-funded research project on private property. It seems like they'd be okay, all in all. But I suppose the pesky public may not be too pleased about it. The final entry is half a year later, and it's about the heightened tensions due to the war. The USSA wanted to delay the project by possibly more than a year. But this seems like a good thing, as it gives them more of a deadline to work with. I don't understand why they'd only get the money from the deep range transmitter though. They've already been funded, and even if the USSA doesn't want to launch the mission, which should be in the following year, they've already went over the deadline, so I assume they finished it. Given that, I'd expect them to be paid for the deliverable, regardless of the client's utilization of it. But given the line at the end about getting back to work, it sounds like they may not have finished, and the funding may have been halted so development couldn't continue. But overall, despite this being a long shot, or a Mars shot, if you will, they seem to have managed it. They went from almost going out of business and gambling everything in a contract they hadn't even won, to actually getting the thing built. This is despite the glaring oversight regarding the weight issues initially, although who is at fault there? Them for not reading the specifications, or the USSA for not getting them correct? We can't say. Also, at least one person died in the making of this booster, sort of like a blood tribute to satisfy the god of law, Murphy, and ensure the booster didn't blow up or something. But as we've seen, the entries stop before we hear of a payout, and they're running awfully close to the day of Armageddon, so let's keep exploring to see what else we can learn. Out in the hall, we can find more lovely collapsed rooms, the first of which is the repair department, directly opposite what I assume was Thomas's office, given his personal terminal was there. Here we find racks of computer and storage equipment, and honestly, not a lot of repair equipment, which is odd. Also, the place is wrecked, so clearly the repair department were phoning it in just a little bit. Now, I'm basing all of this on the title of the terminal we find here, but I think it's a reasonable conclusion. On this terminal, we can find 4 entries regarding repairs that were performed here. The first is about Thomas's terminal, which has serious security, apparently. This of course being the terminal we just broke into quite easily. They wonder if the man's being paranoid, and to be honest, it's hard to say. As far as we know, the photographer was the only one who actually broke in, and none of these measures seem to have helped. But then again, they had a lot riding on the project, so initially it seems warranted. The next one, however, possibly contradicts what I just said. He wants the turrets outside his office, and this all seems to have started just after the project went ahead. Now we see these turrets, and they are controlled from this room. But this is separate from the turret system introduced later, so if he was beginning to act paranoid, he definitely got worse later. Though there didn't seem to be anything sensitive on his terminal except about the reporter, which seems to have happened after all of this. The third entry is from Dr. McClellan, and it's with regards to wanting more storage in the mainframe. This entry seems to be significantly after the others, given what happens next. It might also explain why this terminal is up here, but this otherwise seems like the office section. They appear to have been successful in getting Thomas to allow them to put the mainframe storage up here. Lastly, we get more information on the cover-up. This presumably occurs between the incident with the booster and Thomas's update entry on it. Brent is pulling all the footage related to the incident to remove any evidence of it having occurred. Presumably a backup was made, or else it'd be hard to say how events unfolded like they did. But this worker wasn't willing to question this, and honestly it's not really their job to do so that makes sense. Overall, we get a good look into the paranoia developing in Thomas. Paranoia that seems to have creeped out into the rest of the company, given the sweeping changes he was making that were putting people's lives at risk. There isn't much left on this floor apart from some destroyed offices, which at least gives us some idea on the number of people in the office sections, as opposed to R&D. The company seems to have employed a large number of people based on this. The only other odd thing, and really one of the only examples of this in the whole building, can be found in the bathroom. Here we can find that someone has taken washing hands to an extreme by severing the hand before washing it. Likely then someone else's hands, as washing them's a tad challenging when you don't have any. Also there's 3, so not even all from one person. Strange, but we've seen worse. Round the corner from the toilets, we come to a collapsed section of floor. We can just head down it, but if we jump over, we can find a hatch in an elevator and drop down into it, although the same can be done from below. Inside, we find this fine fellow, seemingly dead from throwing some mentats down their throat while drinking a cola. Given how the building was locked down, and the mentats, I think this is likely a researcher here. Someone under a deadline of some sort, such as they had to come in on a Saturday to work. We've all been there. It doesn't look like blood beneath them, so I think the bombs is a safe bet in their cause of death. Next to this elevator, we can find the reception area, filled with some more creepy propaganda, and a terminal that we can use to get a bit more info on the security practices here. The first one's pretty normal. Just a floor safe installed by Sam Brent at the request of the reception staff. Strange he didn't insist on it, or Thomas, as secure packages or communications would likely have come through here anyway. The next one's a little better. It's about the press, and seems to have been from all the way back when the project was announced. So before the death, it's instructions regarding how to deal with them. No information is to be given, and no questions are to be answered. Everything has to go through the PR department. It could be the reception area was a point of weakness that the press member who snuck in exploited to either get a door opened or a security pass. Although why a member of the press would have that, I'm not too sure. With nothing else to access in this part of the facility, we can finally head into the area where the booster was being stored and see the thing for ourselves. When we enter the door, we pass through a long hallway with some viewing windows onto machinery on the right and a collapsed staircase on the left. This staircase seems to have linked up to the other floors, and this is the case on many of the levels we shall take a look at here. As a result, the only way to traverse the place is by hopping up collapsed walkways surrounding the booster. Speaking of the booster, here it is. Easy to see why this thing already weighed hundreds of tons before it was shrunk down, and it still looks quite hefty. Given my non-existent knowledge about rocket engineering, except in movies, I assume the thruster structure at the bottom is the only part that would actually protrude from the rocket, with the rest tucked up into the actual rocket. I'm guessing, given the cost of this project, and the goal was Mars, this probably wasn't the part that gets discarded as the rocket reaches escape velocity. The booster was probably meant to fire after that, provide acceleration once free, for the most part, of Earth's gravity. Or in the world of Fallout, that's not how they do it anymore, and it's just the one booster getting the rocket out of the atmosphere and then to its destination. Regardless, it's massive. Explains why the sensor here, at least. This would still be incredibly advanced tech, even as some organizations have still been researching after all these years. Now if you're wondering the scorched floor, and why it looks fresh, and all the Institute weaponry, well that was me. The synths pour in here in force, and you can use the booster to roast the bejesus out of them, as they deserve. As we shall see however, this is the only firing we can manage for the rocket, as its fuel reserves aren't high enough to allow it after this. Heading into the room at the bottom here, we can see the big red button used to power this thing. Idiot-proof. Although whether this was the reinforced room for viewing, or it was the one upstairs, I'm not sure. As can be seen in the terminal at the back here, the main power for the boosters is off, and only the auxiliary generators remain. This prevents us from firing it again after we use it. Also located down here is the Junkjet, or as its creator calls it, the finest in weaponized refuse acceleration. But we need to listen to the holotape we can find here for a little more information.
Jeering, leering, laughing, mocking, taunting.
Oh, he graduated all right from high school. It's fine, I'm sure he took shop class. Oh look, he's reading the science mags. How cute.
Har har har. Shop class. Let's see them make this in shop class. My marvel of engineering. The finest in weaponized refuse acceleration. My beauty. My Junkjet. They'll see. The engineers with their suits and fancy degrees. Come Monday morning, they'll all see.
Now this lad, whoever he is, seems quite the salty sealer. Now to be fair, it does sound like all the researchers with more academic qualifications are being tools. This is not surprising, as you do see this in STEM, at least from the insecure ones. But this lad appears to have let it get to him a little too much. He has created the Junkjet, which is a weapon that uses trash as ammunition. But from his comment about Monday, it also sounds like he was planning to go a little postal in the office with this thing, likely to enact vengeance on the people he feels mocked him. Given the weapon and the holotape are still here, this is likely the Monday after the bombs were dropped. So it seems to be that the thing that spared the staff having a brick accelerated through their temples was atomic fire. Going into the elevator located at the bottom here, it takes us up, allowing us to avoid a lot of the collapsed regions. But we don't want to do that as we're interested in them anyway. So taking a jump, we begin to descend and look at some of the rooms hidden away here. The first is a collapsed stairwell, and in it we find another body. From the hard hat, it appears to have been a worker here, so they likely died when the building came down in the initial blast wave. But this raises the question of why this worker had a gun out. Yes, they could be security. In fact, it could be Brent. But this was a Saturday, and it seems like a pretty extreme action to be taken. So we need to see if there's any more information that would tell us why he's doing this. Across from this collapsed stairwell, we can find someone's office. There is, for some reason, a fat man inside. No clue why a researcher would be packing this. But sure, who am I to judge? Here we get another terminal that's useful in helping us flesh out what's going on here. This is the terminal of Dr. McClellan, the individual they brought on to help push the development of the XMB Booster forward. It's a collection of notes in the booster, and they start 2 years before the bombs dropped, in October 2075. He's apparently thrilled to be working in the private sector again, which is pretty funny as the other researcher said they hated it after the project was fully underway. Unfortunately, everything they describe about deadlines and promises is literally what's in their future. He's initially quite hopeful, believing Thomas shares his vision, although from the entries we read, he seemed more concerned about the company as opposed to the work they were pursuing. The next entry is 5 months later, in March 2076, and already the red flags are showing. Thomas threw a fit when he learned of the delay, and apparently it was similar to how generals Dr. McClellan's worked with in the past have reacted. However, he stopped acting like a child quickly enough, and they set about working out a plan to deal with the issue. They're estimating 3 to 6 months, and of course this is about how long it ends up taking them to figure out the problem. Although it didn't result in the doctor having to get a job somewhere else. And let's be honest, if you bring someone in to solve your problems, and it takes longer than you expect, you don't fire them unless they're the actual cause for the delays. If that's not the case, then you're just going to add on more time. After this, 8 months later in November, they finally managed to solve the weight issue somewhat, although this means it took 2 months longer than the estimated upper bound. 17 pounds under seems to be cutting it extremely close though. I do feel, however, this is too close to the weight limitations that it wouldn't be inside some unacceptable margin or unacceptable proximity to those limitations, but it seems that they accepted it. They go out for a night to celebrate, and I heartily approve that he dedicates his life to scientific research, just to justify a night at the bar. It is, in the end, what it's all about. Justifying drinking. I do kid, but Thomas seems cheap if the team are the ones that arranged this instead of him. The next entry, in February of 2077, is a little contradictory. From Thomas's comments, the press event for the firing still happened. He never mentions actually cancelling it outright, which means he must have just moved it after the accident. So the later date must be a few days. Dr. McClellan is quite suspicious about this supposed security event, presumably because despite being the head of the project, he was told nothing regarding the actual incident. This is what leads to everything that happens next, as we shall see when we read on. The last entry is 8 months after this, in October, and it's the final one, as the bombs would have dropped shortly after. When going through the recordings of the test firing just before the press event, the one that killed the reporter, he seems to have saw something. He sees someone run across the bottom of the chamber before the booster fires. Now the question is, why did he look at these recordings now, after 8 months of presumably doing nothing? We haven't got an exact timeline of all the other security measures, but we do know from Thomas's initial entry to Brent that at least some of these were already present at the time of the incident. But something caused Dr. McClellan to become more suspicious. He confronts Thomas about it, who actually just admits to the whole thing. Now when he tries to do the right thing and says he's going to the authorities, Thomas then threatens him and his family, which is a pretty big escalation. I assume these entries are the ones that Brent wanted to destroy when the entry in the repairs office mentions it. There's no reason there would be another recording as well, and it's not like there will be so much footage they could overlook it. Now he finishes by saying he'll go to the press with the tape. This likely never actually happens. I assume because either the bombs dropped and this is all just before, or because Brent killed him to cover everything up. That could be either Brent or Dr. McClellan in the stairwell, either on their way to finish them or trying to leave the building and armed to protect themselves, but we can't say for sure. The last room to look in is what I guess you'd call launch control, right at the top of the chamber. It's mostly wrecked, and there's not much of interest here except a terminal and an elevator that now gives us access to the surface. The terminal has no more information for us, and it's just where you can initiate a test fire outside of the room at the bottom of the chamber. Unless, of course, I'm misremembering, and it's only from up here that's possible. There is, regrettably, not enough fuel for a second firing, which stands to reason as there's no cause for the fuel levels to be large enough for multiple firings while confined to the chamber. Heading up the elevator, we come to the outside silo, on top of which there is space for the booster to be lifted out of. It would be hilarious if there wasn't. Also here is another body, but this just looks like someone who is trying to survive here, going off of the cans and the bottles of drink, not an employee of Arcjet. Overall, a pretty interesting story. A nearly bankrupt company managed to land a great contract with the USSA to build a booster for a rocket that was going to put Americans on Mars. They managed this by already having the research started before they won the contract, and promising an unreasonable deadline as well. To try and meet this deadline, they brought in a military contractor, Dr. Rory McClellan, who is an expert in the field presumably of both rocket science and fusion technology. The project was off to a good start, but then disaster struck with the massive weight problems that somehow no one saw coming. Although if they listened to the first disgruntled employee, even if it had added more time, it seems like it would have solved the problem a lot better. They managed to solve the issue by the skin of their teeth and then moved forward with the demonstration of the booster. Now during all of this, the press have been pressuring the company for more information regarding the booster, and they couldn't really say they were behind schedule. Likely because of this radio silence, someone snuck into the facility, presumably to get pictures of the booster technology. This resulted in them being roasted alive in a test fire, and then Sam Brent covered up the whole thing. This seemed to have slightly delayed the live test fire as well. Additionally, due to the tensions in the world at the time, the booster project seems to have been put on a hiatus, with the funding drying up as a result. Around this time, after they let their suspicions mount for over half a year, Dr. McClellan checked some security footage and saw that someone did indeed get caught in the test fire. Now this could have been separate footage from what Sam Brent was covering up, but that seems unlikely, in which case he did a really bad job of it. Or this information was just stored somewhere else as well as the mainframe, which, given the extra storage being introduced, is entirely possible. He confronted Thomas about it, and it seems like he never got the chance to go to the police. Honestly, I think they had him killed, as opposed to the bombs dropping, as some of these entries seem like they happened after this confrontation. In the end, it wasn't a futile research effort, but it's not like the booster actually got any use, and has just sat here collecting dust for 2 centuries. But all we seen was a paranoid CEO and someone being burned to death. Surely we can do better. Well, we can, here at Hallucigen Inc, a company whose idiocy and disregard for human life is nearly unparalleled, and would be if not for the fact that Vault-Tec exists. They steal the crown, but this group are a close second. Here we'll see human experimentation and the falsification of research results like you wouldn't believe. Even when we arrive, it's already looking good. The gunners are set up at the front and they are a little off. They're all dead here, but otherwise they're usually just raving when we get here. Also, the name's hilarious, as the gas we see that would justify it doesn't seem to have existed until after the company was founded. When we enter Jesus, Mary and Joseph, it's like someone threw the contents of a porta-potty into a plane turbine. That much has hit the fan. We've got a green gas permeating the air. We've got barricades set up and bodies everywhere. We've got some raving lad downstairs who keeps saying it's under his skin and question why his friend Davy, who has previously shrugged off his mortal coil, is here. Also, there's a warning alarm of a chemical leak. So something has got out here. It's still here, and everyone is going bath salts crazy. Outstanding. Oddly enough, it never affects us. Now, behind the reception desk here, we can get our first terminal, and we start to learn about this outstanding company and its great work culture. The first thing we can read is that there has been a leak, but hold your horses. No need to worry about your own safety, oh valued employee. Are the researchers, the more valueder employees, safe? No? Well, you best get back in there and pull them out. Then you may leave. So safety was a #1 priority here, but only if your contribution to the company exceeded a certain threshold. The first entry is a test subject intake. It's from August 12th, 2077. First of all, we don't want the clients to be accidentally killed, so verify that they are just a lowly test subject. Then drug them. Jesus, should this be on the reception terminal? Like, is the receptionist qualified to administer non-lethal doses of sedatives? Do the other forms they need to complete even matter then? As I can only imagine they'd possibly not fill them in time. The last 3 are for dismissals, accidents and fatal accidents. But is that in case the sedative goes wrong, or just for the experiment going wrong later? I assume they're just forging everything, because surely if they're getting away with drugging people, which we can assume has not been consented to beforehand, then they'd be covering themselves somehow. The entry after this is regarding chemical emergencies, like the one right now. It's from the 15th of March, 2076. It lists the hierarchy quite well. Executives are to be evacuated before everyone else. If you are clerical staff, get your arson gear and get the board of trustees to safety. Most are too old to move at any speed. The science staff are to terminate any experiments, which is funny as they were likely the cause of the emergency. Not in this case, but it is 200 years later. The test subjects either get to leave or get locked in, which really could mean death. I mean, the chemicals may not kill, or they could. Really, we don't know. Long enough exposure maybe, and a high enough concentration. Like a lot of gases, it could cause issues with breathing, and a lot of these chemicals were made to be inhaled, so they were meant to affect the respiratory system in some manner, or at least use it as a way to get into the body. But the likely event would be the death of test subjects, as who knows what could go wrong while everyone else is running away. The bottom part makes the timeline of the whole event interesting. It could take days, or even weeks, for the chemicals to disperse. This means the gunners could have been here, and going buck mad, for a while now. Also, why do they not have some emergency air filtration system? Don't labs working with chemicals like this need a way to vent the building, or get rid of gases like this? Maybe it is normal for a recycling system to be left like this and the chemicals to disperse naturally, but I wouldn't have thought so. If you know anything about this, please leave a comment. Overall, this company just seems to use people to achieve its goals, and has little to no regard for the safety of either its workers or its voluntary test subjects. Also, just to keep in mind, we haven't even made it past the reception yet. Oh yes, we're off to a good start. One last thing to look at, now that we have the information on what really happens, is the help wanted signs they have on the desk here. Presumably, these were handed out around town. On it, they say they're looking for research subjects for all of their, emphasis, non-lethal technology. Now, I have no clue how doing this would aid in a high-tech research position. There is no way they're letting you back in here after you've been subjected to the tomfoolery of this place. Now, we don't have any evidence the pay was actually good, but the other 3 points are technically accurate. As we'll see, it was pretty much an in-and-out sort of deal, with the test subject being lucky if their body still functioned correctly by the end of it. Still, bold move to keep these entries about drugging the water on a terminal next to these flyers. To the left of the terminal, we can begin heading into the building. Part of the floor has collapsed, so initially we shall be heading down. We'll also see the gas literally being pumped out due to what I assume is the air recycling system. On the left, we can get to the shower room and find the belongings of what is likely both the gunners and the former workers here, along with more people driven up the wall by this gas. Heading past the plunger, likely responsible for all this horror, we come to a caved-in wall that gives us access to another room. It seems to be a maintenance room of some description, with doors that connect deeper into the facility, but are blocked by debris, so instead we'll head back upstairs using another collapsed section of floor. Up here, at the end of the hall, we get our first look at the cutting edge, and I use that term very generously, research being performed here. Now before we look at what was being built here, I just want you to acknowledge that the other side of this room has desks and chairs. So people worked in here. This was not a containment room or a place to test dangerous equipment. Alright, now let's look at this terminal. This research was on weaponization, and the prototype in question is called the suppressor. It can be activated from this terminal, but we'll look at its details first off to see how bad an idea this was. So this was meant to be a non-lethal suppression device that uses an electrical current. Alright, not too bad, kind of like a large-scale taser. Could still be bad, but we'll withhold judgment. The next set of entries are the lab reports, and contain 2 entries. One on the hallucigen gas, and the other on something called the eradicator. We'll take the gas first, I think. So this gas was meant to be delivered using a fragmentation grenade as a means to pacify riots, and they chose a grenade to be the delivery vehicle. You know, as I was writing this, I literally had a comment of, I bet this still injures people, and lo and behold, it does. Apparently seriously in one case, which, you know, it's a grenade. That generally happens. Everyone exposed had their adrenal glands rupture, which resulted in enormous dumps of adrenaline into their bodies, along with hallucinations. It also caused them to enter a rage-fueled frenzy. So in a way, it would pacify the riots, as we learned 4 to 5 died in the resulting fight. You can't have a riot if no one's alive to riot, now can you? Also, someone died of heart failure. Now keep in mind, this was the same 5 people, or at least I'm assuming it was. So the grenade was thrown, 2 of them got injured, and all of them went through the looking glass. Disliking what they saw, they engaged in mortal combat. 1 emerged victorious, whereupon they died of heart failure, likely due to the adrenaline. Riot successfully pacified. Also, apparently this isn't the first failure they've had with testing, and if attempts have been made to improve this, does that mean it was even worse before? Well, they're going to try and fix it, but I say, it's not broken. It's technically doing the job, and thus far nothing has said the gas has to be non-lethal. The part about concentrations might make this a lot worse in a closed environment, as if it has to be effective outside, then a leak in here is a lot worse. Now on to the eradicator entry. On the face of it, this one's a lot more reasonable. It's used as a portable decontamination unit and can handle 49 out of 50 agents. However, it seems to use radiation to do it, and the subjects in proximity all died when it was activated. So technically, this one also works. It's just also removing the biological contaminant that is human life. It then replaces said biological contamination with radiation contamination. So yeah, not super. They decide to consider classifying it as a lethal weapon instead. And I mean, yeah, that's not a bad idea to be honest. But the 2-ton weight power supply is just poor design work again. Come on now. We need our mobile irradiation weapon to be mountable on at least a pony, if not a micro horse. Now, let's activate the suppressor and see how reasonable it was to deploy it in an office-like environment. Alright, you all saw that. That bolt just missed our heads. Like this wasn't even, hey, let's see if we can paralyze Keith with this thing. This was, she took the kids in the house, all shall know my pain, and taking out the whole office. Just a bad idea to put that thing in here, really. Like, it's even next to the fire extinguishers. Down the hall to the left, we can find some of the poor mercenaries here that seem to have tried to hold themselves up with some traps and ride out the trip they were on. It didn't really help in the end, but at least some of them were semi-functioning. Though to be fair, we do see a few examples of barricades, so it does appear that attempts were made to give themselves a safe place to come down. Also, this lad here was a universal donor. Not really relevant to anything, I just still think it's funny they tattoo their blood types on their heads. Do dog tags usually have your blood type as well? Would make sense, I suppose. Anywho, onwards. Heading to the end of the hall, and past a few more attempts to bunker down, we come to a flight of stairs taking us up to the next floor. Here, we arrive at what seems to be the finance or accounting departments. Going off the terminals we'll look at in a moment. A department that we shall see was full of a bunch of big fibbers. The first bit of evidence for this is the note we can find on this desk with the terminal on it. We actually need it to get the context what happens on the terminal. The note is from someone called Eric to a Paul, and it's a goldmine of how deep in it this company was. The federal government had a lot of contracts with Hallucigen, and apparently wants out of them. From the entries we've read, you can see why. The R&D department are good at appearing smart, but really aren't producing anything of worth. Which again, the entries clearly explain why the output is poorly received, if not why they themselves are useless. Eric is outright asking Paul to commit fraud to intentionally mislead and bamboozle investors. Now apparently Paul is capable of doing this, so maybe it's happened before, but the need seems very dire this time. We can take a look at the terminal to see why. The first entry is the initial draft for their third quarter financials. Now they're operating at a loss of $1.8 billion, although as pointed out by a lot of people in my video on the Vin Factory, inflation was very high pre-war, so likely this is a lot less by today's standards. Still, probably a few million in the red though, which is not great from an investor's point of view. The company is only 3 years old, so losses are to be expected, but the issues really run a lot deeper than this. Eric Rice, the same Eric from the note, is the CEO, and says the quarter's been difficult, and a lot of products have been delayed. Which is likely because, as we saw, none of them do what they're meant to do, like at all. He claims a positive cash flow will be the case in 2 years, which implies 8 more quarters of poor performance. This was never meant to make it to the public though, so this is likely the report Eric read and told Paul to fix. Draft 2 paints a very different picture. The 180 turn is eye-watering. They are now claiming an extra $2.9 billion in revenue to take them all the way out of the red and into positive flow. The long-term contracts Eric is referring to are likely the contracts he is working to stop the government getting out of. Although given the deliverables seem to be either non-existent or wrong, I'm not sure how he managed this. The part at the end is sadly likely correct. Given the current state of the world, you'd likely have little trouble finding demand for what they're selling, although it would likely be with most of them repurposed for lethal use. Heading to the back of the room, we now gain access to the area where they tested all of their totally safe to use inventions. The area is full of raving people when we get here, and you can deploy all of these lovely prototypes on them from a room overlooking this area, as we'll see. Keep in mind these small enclosures are where all of the test subjects would be locked in if the place had a chemical leak, which is funny as that's literally what's happening right now. Heading to the far end of the maze, we can climb on top and get access to the viewing area, or you could have just jumped across in the first case, but that's not as fun. At the top we get 5 buttons that play, or are meant to anyhow, a small audio presentation. Before triggering the various prototypes on display here, we can listen to all of them, although for some reason one of them just won't play for me.
Hallucigen's Eradicator provides your forces with a state-of-the-art field decontamination solution. Small amounts of residual radiation may persist in the affected area. Dosage subject to change pending safety evaluations.
Repeat.
Criminal scum? Don't get a gun. Try Hallucigen Suppressor, a safe, reliable, and effective way to paralyze even armored targets. Side effects may include the partial and/or complete paralysis of the user, bystanders, small animals, and/or large animals. Discretion is advised. Hallucigen gas. Reliable crowd control since 2055. Hallucigen gas can stop a riot faster than any other product on the market, and without the messy side effects of our competitors' offerings. Use with caution. Unpredictable sensory experiences may result. Subjects exposed to high dosages may suffer catastrophic adrenal failure. Hallucigen's dispersant is ideal for peacefully clearing an area of civilians.
Repeat. A chemical leak has been detected.
Hallucigen is not responsible for any damage, injury, or loss of life sustained in mass panics that may or may not result from the use of dispersant.
So we have the Eradicator, the Disruptor, Hallucigen gas, and the Dispersant, which has yet to be seen in a terminal entry. All of them are pretty accurate, listing very little upside and awful downsides. I only take issue with the gas presentation. It should say can start a riot faster than anything in the market. Otherwise, all of these will take out the user and the target as well. So overall, great stuff. I'm not sure why the third one will not play, fairly certain it's meant to be the camouflage one we'll hear about later, but I'm not sure. Nothing I do seems to get it to work. The terminal behind these buttons gives us some more information on how these presentations are meant to be run. The only entry is about the observation lab, and it's great stuff. Pretty much boils down to show them something flashy. If something mildly goes on fire, activate a different product. If something really goes on fire, get them out, but not to safety. Show them some marketing. Also, do it anyway when the Eradicator goes off, as presumably it irradiates the area to a large enough degree that it could affect them. Begs the question why they set it up right outside the viewing windows and the stairs, as opposed to, you know, the other side of the room? Yeah. The final thing to do is replace anything broken and hose the place down, presumably as the test subjects they drugged would be in these rooms so the prototypes could be used on them. Given the side effects, I don't understand how everything wasn't constantly going wrong. But hey, that could be why they've got these protocols in the first place, as this was in fact the case. Heading out to the left, we come to the central atrium overlooking the foyer we entered at the start. We can either go left, heading lower down into the facility, or right, into another office area. We'll do the latter first, and finish off with heading down into the R&D section of this place. Heading to the right, we enter what was the CEO's office, who we've come to know as Eric Rice. Here we can access his terminal. But before that, I'm not sure if you can see it. The amphitheater with that cult can be seen through this window. But I don't actually think this building has a direct line of sight to that one. I could be wrong, but this doesn't seem right to me. Anyway, the terminal. It is indeed the terminal of Eric Rice, and it only has one entry on it, dated for the 25th of October, so the Monday after the bombs dropped. The first part that jumps out is he was going to Paul to see how well they'd done falsifying the financials. From the entry we read, the announcement looked pretty good. But there'd have to be more, or else it would never hold up under the most basic of scrutiny. 12:30 is hilarious. He has a meeting with the ethics board, with a Dr. Everill, on their human subjects protocol. That it's called ethics is either ironic, or there is actually someone that is meant to oversee all this. They are either in on it, or in the dark, or just really bad at their job. Given the first entry we read here, the comment on water seems to be about drugging the representative of the ethics board, because they likely have an issue with the test subjects being drugged? This is either a 5D chess move, or checkers with crayons and a 2x2 board. Unfortunately, we'll never know the outcome. It could be he's also just trying to figure out if offering water would be seen as a bad move. But in that case, if everyone is so weary about the water, you already know you've got a problem. After this, he's meeting with a Colonel Thomas Nelson in relation to a Project Scythe, or at least I assume the acronym is for a project. It could also be in relation to the department the Colonel works for. Can't find anything else in this project either. Next is a procurement conference, which could either be the company they're trying to buy out, or else just general equipment and supplies they need. It finishes with a sales meeting with the same Colonel, after he's witnessed a demo that we can assume went wrong in some manner, given the track record here. Given the date, none of these meetings ever actually happened. Going out of the office, we approach the area to the left of where we exited earlier. This leads us to a stairwell that's seen better days, but sure, so have we all. Heading down, we see what I'm pretty sure is the only skeleton in the whole building, or at least the parts of one. I don't know if it's poking fun that this company just did so little work on Saturdays that it was virtually empty, and as a result this is the only person that died in here. To clarify, I am in favour of this, as I shouldn't have to work on Saturday anyway. Heading to the bottom of the stairs, we find this poor lad propped up against the wall, seemingly injured in some way, and on a trip he did not pack enough bags for. We can hear him ranting and raving pretty much the whole time we are in proximity to this area. Overall, he seems to be hallucinating either dead friends or enemies being alive, and something under his skin. But at least we can see what happens to those that survive the gas. Presumably at some point his heart will give out due to the rupturing of the adrenal glands. He looks on death's doors already. Past him we get to the area that seems to be the checkpoint before the lab section, with warnings present about hazardous materials. Warnings that we can see were totally justified. There is a single terminal down here that links to the mainframes located in this building. However, upon trying to connect to them, we don't get great information. 1 server is still up, 4 have no response, and 5 are critical. Although it could be that those 4 are also critical. Really, we can't know as they're already disconnected. The single administrator is us, as we find no evidence, anymore anyway, that someone else is compos mentis enough to use the terminals. Either because they are currently as mad as a bag of spiders, or just dead. The warning at the bottom is a bit useless. I doubt there's much data left to salvage with only 1 server up. Heading into the region with hazardous materials, we can either head through the decontamination unit that is still active down here, or through a wall to the right. Not that the decontamination does anything for us, though thankfully it's not the eradicator, as we don't die a horrible death from extreme radiation poisoning. There's a terminal here to disable it, but apart from that, it's not much use to us. In the lab itself, we can finally see where the magic happened here. Don't worry, you'll get that joke very soon. It's a fairly bog standard chemistry lab, with a lot of the apparatus set up on most of the surfaces. Found throughout are these glowing green canisters, and yes, this is where the gas was kept. There's also a safe with a stealth boy in it, and this also plays a part in the research, or in that case lack thereof, that was going on here. You may be thinking the canisters being left out is bad, even for this place, but we can actually see that they did seem to be secure behind glass at some point. Or at the least there's a lot of smashed glass and broken hallucigen gas canisters in front of them. So I am giving the unearned benefit of the doubt to this company. They could have also just had them lying around the place, who knows. Now for the last terminal. It's a terminal on the results of their testing of various products, with the first being one we haven't seen yet, the InvisiWave. Strangely enough, the date on this one is the 25th of October, so unless this is meant to be for 2076, this allegedly occurred after the bombs dropped. Possibly someone who is a very dedicated worker and actually came into work on Monday. They demonstrated this to some admiral, this being the 3rd test, and they want to install it on ships. Now we aren't given a lot of information about what this is. However, according to the message at the end, this was the magic I was talking about. They literally use mirrors and misdirection, along with some hack tech and a trapdoor, to fool someone into believing their product was working. It sounds like it was meant to emit a wave that does the same thing as a stealth buoy, so I suppose they sold it as a way to make ships invisible? Yeah, they're gonna need a pretty big door to drop a ship through. They need 200 units by December, and people at the company know it's a lie, although why they wouldn't just scrap the contract, I don't know. The DM could be the Damien that Eric had a meeting with on his calendar, on this very day actually. If that is the same person, they seem to oversee all the R&D to some degree. Or DM just stands for Development Lab Managers. But the entries don't really get any better from here. Next is the Eradicator, the best contaminating decontamination unit on the market. It says the 21st of October, but the actual entry says 25. So I'm guessing this is just a bug, and the 25 for the previous one likely was as well. The machine successfully destroyed all contaminants, including the subject who was presumably operating it. They got an eye-watering 5100 rads, which is well above the threshold for radiation burns, I'm given to understand. They managed to get the VIPs out before they saw that. This was presumably from the viewing platform we saw before. Apparently, this is meant to be a handheld decontaminator, but I kind of wonder if that was even feasible in the first place, or this was just a promise by management, and in this case R&D's not to blame. It's hard to say, due to the tomfoolery they kept pulling here. Up next we have the dispersant, on the 18th of October, and this time the test is actually listed correctly. The test was a total success, as it dispersed the subject's sanity from their mortal form, and or dispersed them from the building. In all seriousness, it went horribly wrong, and they fled from their child, the police had to capture them, and they were institutionalized 2 days later, after doing God knows what. The response from management was to transfer the project to Karen, as the current line of research was giving them total nonsense. The current samples were to be destroyed sadly, and then they were to be fired, whoever this was. Presumably not the same head case in charge of the previous 2 projects. The second last one is from the same day, on the gas that caused all of this. It's still causing adrenal glands to rupture, despite attempts to fix this in 4 of 5 subjects. This time around it could be a different test, as one of the subjects managed to survive the exposure, and were then subsequently beaten to death by the other 4. Now unless this is what they meant by heart failure before, which is technically correct, I think it is another one. The comment about survive is also quite odd here, as it implies they didn't have the usual response of going insane, or at least recover from it. This leads me to believe it was separate. Overall, the DM's pretty pleased, and would like it if this was actually a weapon, as opposed to being sold as crowd control, as, well, if it's a weapon, it's already done. They mentioned the grenade, and we know it was then tested as a grenade, so the turnaround on that seems to have been pretty quick. Though it could be it was already delivered with a grenade, but back then the damage due to the grenade was a problem, but it is now not. The final entry is in the suppressor, on the 17th, the day before. Again, I don't really see what the problem is here. It suppresses one's motor functions, permanently. Mission accomplished. The subjects were then transferred to Medford Memorial, so it will be interesting to see if there's a large number of wheelchair-bound patients there, or some records, that would then back this up. Now apparently, whoever this is helped create the Mesmetron and is trying to reverse engineer it, or some other prototype similar to it. From what I can recall, the Mesmetron didn't use electricity to incapacitate, so I assume this prototype's something else. But they can't seem to figure out how their own prototype works, and they seem to have leaned heavily on the Mesmetron work they did in the past, as they are the highest paid employee here. Overall, apart from the gas, which ended up doing literally the opposite of its intended use, everything here is a failure, going all the way from not being finished to just being an outright lie to their possible customers. Now the blame can likely be laid somewhat at Rice's feet, as he seems pretty desperate to make the company look profitable. So there seems to be a big push to bring new products to market, and the researchers were likely feeling some of this pressure. Of course, none of this excuses the selling of the stealth equivalent of snake oil, mysterious mirror person. The last thing here to riddle out is what did the gunners touch that gassed the place? We can find several broken canisters for hallucinogen gas towards the exit. Given the broken windows behind them, they seem to have smashed them in an attempt to gain access to the canisters. It appears it was part of an assembly or a distribution line of some sort, which explains the glass, as it would need to be stored safely in case it ended up leaking, like it is right now. Overall, they seem to have done this to themselves. The building has somehow sat undisturbed for a whole lot of years, and then they came in and started monkeying around with these weapons. Shockingly, literally in some cases, they have not gotten safer with age. The whole building got flooded with a field riot pacification weapon, and they all became as mad as a bag of spiders. This seems to have torn the group apart, with signs of infighting being present throughout the building. We arrived to clean up the place, but they've already managed to deal with each other for the most part, by the time we get here. Now we've dealt with experimenting on yourself, experimenting on others, and going off the deep end, and descending into a pit of paranoia that ends with you covering up a murder and trying to kill a whistleblower. But what about dumping military-grade technology into a junkyard, and then getting someone killed there because of it? Well, that's what we'll take a look at next here, at the Robotics Disposal Yard, an area just a stone's throw from Sanctuary Hills, and one that actually hides a pretty cool secret. Spoiler, you get a pet Sentry bot with a limited patrol route. But I'm getting ahead of myself. When we arrive here, it looks just like a small junkyard. In fact, it literally is one, with rusted old cars and tires being pretty much the only thing here, apart from a not-so-subtle Sentry bot. Now, oddly enough, apart from this, there are no other robots here, which is odd given the place's purpose, and the logs we read confirm that there should have been many, but maybe they all got cleared out periodically, and this was all that was left just before the bombs. It's sitting in the back beside a trunk that was dumped with it, and actually at one point had some pretty interesting things inside, as we'll soon learn. Sometimes you can find a scavenger here, but apart from that event, we need to head inside over here to find out more. Inside, we can see a skeleton sprawl beside a terminal with some blood splatter behind it, and a bloody handprint on said terminal. That, together with a stim pack, suggests that whoever was here was badly injured while operating the terminal, made an attempt to heal themselves, failed, and then expired in front of it. The blood suggests they were shot, as being stabbed that hard to cause that spray seems unlikely unless they got their throat cut, and given what's on the terminal, we can guess what likely happened to them. Taking a look at said terminal, we can see this was an official robotics disposal site, so I guess the devs just got lazy with actually making the site look authentic. We've quite a few things to get through here, so we'll start with the delivery log. They go from the most recent to the oldest, or at least the oldest this log covers. Starting from there, they got a shipment of Protectrons missing all of their limbs in 2076, then nothing for about 4 months, before a shipment of Chatterbox Mr. Handy showed up. 2 months pass, and then again they get a load of Protectrons with no limbs. And then there's a week or so before some blind iBots show up. All very strange. The real kicker's the RoboBrains that either suffered brain damage, or were built using idiots in the first place. Which, you know, maybe you'd check for that first of all, but maybe it's hard to tell before it boots up. Who knows? The decommissioned Sentry bots seem like the most reasonable shipment of all, with it being followed by more limbless Protectrons. The most recent one is a week before the bombs dropped, and is about the Sentry bot that we find here, that the workers here have identified as a prototype, which I assume is because of the holotape that came with it, but more on that soon. Overall, they don't really seem that busy, and we actually get some confirmation of this later on, though you'd think there'd be more of an influx of robots, given where they are. Next up is the employee notes, going back more than a year between two workers, Dylan and Mike. The first entry's from Dylan on May 24th, 2076. He comments about how odd the shipments of faulty protectrons are, and how it could be the result of robots assembling robots. Now I can't recall exactly, but I'm pretty sure one of the robotics factories that we see does have a robotic assembly line. I would have thought it would be the standard, not by hand assembly. Regardless, he raises an interesting point that something odd may be happening. Next is an entry from Mike from the 10th of June. He physically hurts both Dylan and us with a joke regarding the blinded eyebots, and then comments about the robots building other robots could be possible. Though again, this type of repetitive task is something they excel at. Why would you not just assume it's humans doing what we do best? Failing miserably at doing the same thing with no deviation at all flawlessly. There's a pattern forming here, as it is odd why there are so many that just have parts missing. Possibly due to the joke, Dylan and Mike don't talk again until the following year, on the 22nd of July. Mike is beginning to think for himself as the decommissioned Sentry bot shows up, or at least that's what they're told. He is of the opinion they're perfectly fine, and even just wants to grab one and use it to mow the lawn, presumably with its minigun. Though in the process, surely you could sow a crop on whatever is left of the garden once those tire treads from that big bastard are done with it. But the plot, like my ass after Christmas, thickens. There's something not quite right about the robots being dumped here. 2 months later, on the 9th of September, more and more of these strange disposals are coming in. It's not just them either, it's other sites as well. Although I don't believe there are any other disposal sites in the game, they just keep getting dropped off. Now Dylan thinks it could be a mistake, and raises a very good point. How is it not just cheaper to put the limbs on them than dispose of them? Well, likely because someone's scamming someone else, or trying to cover something up. A month later, and we've reached the strangest delivery of all. Now we don't know whether it was Smith and Jones, or Hemsworth and Thompson, but apparently the men in black dumped a strange Sentry bot. They don't even try and disguise the fact that this one was fine. The thing drove itself into the dump and switched off, and they just threw the trunk in beside it. A trunk with a holotape you've been seeing along the bottom there the whole time. Combat Sentry Proto, Mark IV. So yes, a fully functioning, or at least it appears to be fully functioning, prototype Sentry bot was dumped in the yard here. Some unknown individuals did the dumping, and then just didn't identify themselves. But Dylan is interested to know what's on the tape. However, Mike, the knave that he is having none of it. He doesn't want to jeopardize the cushy job of walk around the perimeter, which really takes about a minute, if even, a few times a week. Which implies they don't actually dispose of anything. The robots get dumped here, and they're either taken somewhere else to be broken down, or they're just left here. Which begs the question why they need those two at all. If they were concerned about them being stolen, they wouldn't be dumping them here in the first place. He tells Dylan not to check the tape, or to touch the robot. This is pretty sound advice, and if we check the tape, we can see why. On it we see very little on this thing's origins. Who built it and who commissioned it are both redacted. I assume the third redacted is also who built it, so straight away, the plot thickens even more. But wait, what's that at the top? USAF Remote Sentry Prototype Mark IV. Okay, well, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say the client was likely the USAF, which makes a lot of sense, given the capabilities of remote piloting this thing has. But more on that soon. We have the option of activating the Sentry bot, and are greeted with this screen. It's the boot up sequence for the Sentry bot. We are warned that any test should only be conducted in a closed environment, and due to some legalese, we are apparently responsible for any incidents that possibly occur, which I never agreed to, you sneaky TOS. We'll see this big lad in action soon, but a few more things first. There's an information section here, and it's pretty much just saying activate at your own risk, which could be part of the reason why it's here. But after reading the TOS, we are bound by the logos of the universe itself, along with our next of kin, to destroy the Sentry bot. But, I mean, let's be honest, we aren't doing that. Instead, let's boot her up and see what happens. But before that, one last thing. Its intended purpose, under defense protocol. Here, things become very interesting. Apparently this thing is connected in some way to the US military infrastructure, and can detect nearby military bases requiring assistance. Now, given the state of the world, I mean, all of them need assistance. All the assistance you can muster, little Sentry bot. Not also goes without saying that all these places are, to some degree, occupied by several less than savory characters, like us, but mostly the people with whom we wish to part them with their valuables, by parting them with their vital humours. This Sentry bot is very effective at that, as we shall see. In fact, we can see right now, by booting it up, almost immediately the mole rats that have been nesting here and just left us alone for some reason start to swarm the thing, and it carves through them, predictably. I mean, come on, they never stood a chance. After this, it will just patrol the junkyard. Now, it isn't hostile to us, which is odd, as I could swear when I first encountered this thing that it was. Now, that was a decade ago, so perhaps my memory of said events can't really be trusted. Another strange thing is why there's a body that looks like it was shot inside. Now, I assume this is Dylan, as he was the one who wanted to activate the thing, and the holotape is in the terminal when we get here. It could be he activated the Sentry bot, and for whatever reason, it attacked him. Or he activated it began to go out of control, he got shot, and before dying managed to get in here and deactivate the thing. Now, if we go back to the defensive protocol, we can see there are 4 bases here: USAF Olivier, South Boston Checkpoint, Reverie Satellite Array, and Fort Hagen. Upon choosing one, the Sentry bot just trundles off towards it. It will maim anything aggressive in its path, and, well, I mean, it is a Sentry bot, and this section of the map isn't very highly leveled. Nothing is really a threat to it. Oddly enough, when it reaches a location, it just seems to come back to the junkyard, or at least it did for me. Now, this could be because everything was dead, and despite saying it's going to patrol the perimeter, it only needs to do that and then leave. Or it's just lazy. Yeah, we'll go with that. But this does leave the question of what it was actually doing here in the first place, and really what was going on with everything else in general. Now, if I was a paranoid conspiracy theorist, which I am, I'd say that it seems likely someone was using the salvage yards to either inflate unit sales and thus overall performance, and then selling the more valuable components on the side to cover their asses, or sabotage. They could have been listing the units they bring here as actual sales to make their own numbers look better, and then selling the weaponry components, like the arms, the protectrons, or the sensory components of the iBots. It was wartime, so I'm sure profit could have been made. Option 2 is that the assembly lines had undergone some changes, and indeed, were creating a lot of faulty builds. Because of this, many of the robots couldn't be sold in the market. Now, whether they were being declared faulty, or this was done on the sly to cover it up, we can't say. Lastly, there is the option of sabotage, and these were perfectly functional robots that were being stripped of parts and disposed of to destroy evidence, or just thrown out whole to cover it up. Again, wartime, so I can believe this. As for the prototype, it could have been left here if it was defective, but when we use it, it seems fine, so this doesn't make sense to me. Additionally, we don't know what Dylan, if that is who died here, actually did, so they could be at fault. The alternative is this was either a test environment for it, or they were trying to have a prototype in the field should the need to defend their bases arise. It may not have been ready yet, so they couldn't officially use it, but this way, given a copy of the tape, they could just activate it from a terminal or one of the bases, and send it off on a mission. We don't know what the range is, but I think technically you can activate this thing from anywhere in the Commonwealth, and get it to rain down fire on any per soul in range. Overall, a very strange result of robotics research that, despite having seemingly killed one former user, serves us pretty well. But you know what's really been missing so far? Mistreatment of employees. Not just slipping something in the water of unsuspecting test subjects, or getting them to register a badge so they don't get shot. I mean putting them through a horrific Lord of the Flies-like situation, even if, as we'll see, it was well intended to some degree. Well, we get such an area here, in the Cambridge Polymer Labs, a research facility located, shockingly, in Cambridge, not too far from the crater. Yes, technically you'd think it would be more damaged, but here we are. Inside we can see the spirit of Halloween was alive and well here, even if none of the employees are anymore. But before we have a proper look around, when we arrive, we're greeted by a Mr. Handy unit called Molly, who gives us some background on this place, and a great job offer.
Welcome to the Cambridge Polymer Labs. Employment opportunities await in the field of scientific research. Shall we begin your application now?
What?
Employment benefits include competitive salary, health coverage, accidental death coverage, and 2 weeks paid vacation. Employment opportunities await in the field of scientific research. Shall we begin your application now?
Sure, I'm game.
Let's begin the interview. Due to increased demands for staff in all fields, we have condensed the employment test accordingly. Question 1. Do you possess previous experience with polymer synthesis?
Polymer synthesis? What are you talking about?
Calculating test results. I am pleased to offer you the position of janitorial staff. Expect a shiny future in the field of mopping floors. Would you like the orientation before beginning your work in the labs?
Orientation?
The orientation is intended to provide the new employee with a history of the company to enrich their working experience. Would you like the orientation before beginning your work in the labs?
Sure, why not?
Wonderful. Please find an open seat, and we will begin the presentation. The genesis of Cambridge Polymer Labs lies in the research of a group of brilliant graduate students. John Elwood, Erica Woolham, and Wilfred Bergman met during their time together at CIT. This slide shows them at their graduation. Their research into nucleostrictive and piezoelectric polymers caught the attention of Colonel George Kemp in the fall of 2073. In the spring of 2074, the company was founded, with a generous grant provided by the Defense Experimental Research Project Initiative. The research produced here has resulted in several of the components used in the Liberty Prime project that led to the successful defense of Anchorage. The company enjoys a strong relationship with the military and welcomes your addition to the research team that helps build a better America. Please follow me to the research lab so that you may begin your work. Complimentary beverages are provided for employees. Please label any food or cigarettes you leave in the break room.
So a lot to go over. We've arrived here and managed to land a cushy job due to a shortage of workers. This has resulted in a shortened interview process, with but one question that we can lie about, given our abilities. You can also just do what I do every day and act confused, and you become a janitor. It doesn't matter. The shortage in all fields is likely due to the war. After this, we learn about 3 of the researchers whose tragic story we're going to uncover here, although the high of it is a little odd. Molly tells us of 3 CIT graduates, John Elwood, Erica Woolham, and Wilfred Bergman. They did material science research, specifically nucleostrictive and piezoelectric polymers, so composite materials with unique properties. A Colonel George Kemp became interested in the research in the fall of 2073, and he funded the opening of the lab only a few months later. And yes, I see you Fallout devs. Defense Experimental Research Project Initiative. DERPI. If memory serves, I said it 10 years ago, and I'll say it again. I would have preferred DERPA myself. But hey, they can't all be winners. Apparently they were involved in the production of some of the components for Liberty Prime, although we never learn which components. The lab seems to be entirely military focused, and sure, when has that ever let us down with regards to a tragic story? 3 years on, the company was still going strong, to some degree. Really, we'll learn quite quickly that something has gone horribly wrong. But before that, and the rest of the tour, let's look around. Heading past the projector room with its wrecked roof, we come to the toilets, and sadly, there are no bodies here, though we'll see many soon. However, there is a skull in this display case, and it seems unlikely this would have been here before the war. I hope so, anyway. Could just be a subtle threat to interns about the dangers of no results. The whole grind set culture of material science startups, don't you know? Heading back into the reception area, there's just a spine on the ground. It's a bit odd, as this place has been locked down for a while, and as far as we know, only one person was actually on the outside of the lab, as we shall soon learn, and given what happens to them, this is not their spine. Though there is enough evidence other people were here, so it could be theirs. Heading up the stairs, we can see the admin section of this building, and the years have not been kind overall. The bloody floor's caving in, just poor construction work overall. On the other side, past a display case with the office prize fire extinguisher, we come to a large office area. There isn't much left here, however, except for someone's arm for some reason, and a stash of caps located in an old terminal. This could mean others have been here over the years, or other staff were still present here and didn't survive when the bombs hit. Which would be odd, however, given what we'll soon learn about the building's specs, the fact nobody else was mentioned to be here, and that no one else apart from the research staff were meant to be here on Saturday morning due to the project grind. Ignoring the office for now, we head back downstairs towards the cleanroom area. We can head through the room next to the kitchen that most of the upper floor collapsed into. Inside the kitchen, we can see it's also been a little raided, but given somebody was actually still here after the bombs dropped, and others have been since, this makes sense. Heading further in, we pass through a shower area, where people presumably cleaned off before and after entering the cleanroom. Of course, there's also a separate decontamination procedure as well. Not much else to find here, not even a random skull, so on to the room itself, or more specifically, the rest of the tour with Molly.
Here is is your jumpsuit and mop. Please take a moment to dress in your proper work attire and follow me into the clean room. The research staff will greet you on the other side of the clean room. Thank you for your attention and welcome to the team. Please enter the clean room and proceed to the labs to continue the tour. I have been instructed to inform you that Director Elwood has issued mandatory overtime due to uncompleted milestones. Consequently, staff will not be allowed to leave the labs until the Piezonucleic lining project has been completed. Please report to the project lead, Dr. Elwood Woolham, for specific research assignment. Starting decontamination sequence. I have been instructed to inform you that Director Elwood has issued mandatory overtime due to uncompleted milestones. Have you completed the research on the Piezonucleic lining project?
What am I supposed to do?
Perhaps you could begin by familiarizing yourself with the current state of the research. The console at your workstation should provide access. Have you completed the research on the Piezonucleic lining project?
I'm working on it.
Please see Dr. Elwood Woolham for project assignment.
Let me out of here, you stupid robot!
Employment will be terminated for any researchers attempting to leave before completion of the project.
So yes, this was not the orientation into a friendly, hybrid model work environment that the AI LinkedIn ad promised us. Because of the missed deadlines, some sort of lockdown has been initiated, and we're stuck in here. We are asked to finish the Piezonucleic lining project, which you'll recognize the name of, as it was one of the research areas that got them their funding in the first place. This might also explain some of the bodies we find here, and some of the other inhabitants present. Molly is luring people in, locking them in, and thus far no one has managed to succeed in finishing the project, and they just end up dead. You can also not interview for the job, in which case anybody else that did could have just died outside the lab. The decontamination sequence doesn't actually end until you leave the room, through a collapsed wall, as the doors broke. The wall is incredibly rusted, and looks to have came down a long time ago, although the rest of the room's fine. But we get an answer to this quite soon. We also get our first proper body. Ignore the Voltec logo, it's likely just asset reuse. Whoever this was seems to have lost an arm. Now given all of the goings on here, it could have happened while they were alive. Not impossible. But honestly, it's more likely they just died from starvation, or went out how a few of the others did. In the next room is where we can reap the benefits of their research if we brave the rest of the lab. It's also where we find the remains of someone. A head is just lying on the table with a terminal on it, and a leg on the ground behind it. So yes, more than a few lost their lives in this lab, with a few possible causes. Now, on to this terminal. Now a warning before we begin. This is Erica's terminal, but this first half is immensely jargon heavy, so if you want to skip the details of this fictional, although possibly not complete nonsense, armor coding process, go ahead. It's not quantum computing, so it's outside my area of expertise. This was the Nucleostrictive lining project, and the first entry is the project thesis, outlining the goals and the theory of what could be achieved should the project succeed. So they want to take a piezoelectric material, lead zirconium titanate, and coat it with the polymer being a composition of gold and lithium hydride in this case. Said polymer should allow the conversion of ionizing radiation into electrical energy, and if so, be implementable on current power armor frames that are being deployed in combat. So to simplify it, they want to coat the armor with a polymer and PZT, so that when it's exposed to ionizing radiation, as opposed to being damaged, the radiation can be converted into electricity. Then it seems to be harvested for use in the armor. This still makes sense as the fusion cells of the armor still convert their produced energy to electrical energy for operation. Given the high risk of exposure to radiation from fallout in these conflicts, or other forms of harmful radiation, this actually seems like a great idea. However, the next entry quickly highlights that it's not going as well as they want. It's with regards to the thermal dissipation during the whole process. Overall, the harvesting is better than the current fusion engines. Now this then makes me wonder if the goal wasn't then to replace them, as they do mention later it was to be a coating on the armor, but if the harvesting efficiency was this much higher, could this not have also been used to replace the current method by which the energy is converted, as she implies the current engines do? Anyway, the ionic excitation of the gold atoms that is required to produce the harvestable electrons is causing thermal issues. The heat generated is causing the gold present in the nanoweave to break down. This tracks given the low melting point of gold, so at the minute sizes they're working at here, nanometers, I assume, small amounts of heat could cause huge issues. Increasing the surface area to dissipate this heat seems to be the solution they arrived at. However, this solution doesn't turn out to be a feasible one, due to the issues with the tensile strain the materials under. Their changes seem to have worked incredibly well, as they've increased the material lifetime by several hundred times it seems. This came at the cost of only a very small loss to efficiency overall. They consider this to be a success, as they've arrived at a massive improvement over where they were before. However, the thinner weave, while addressing the issues overall, is a problem when being applied to mobile power armor suits. It lacks the ability to handle the tensile stresses put on it, and they need to go back to the original thick. That's thick with one C, you dirty bastards. Design. Colonel Kemp was the main driving force to this change, as he just threatened them. But it is research funded with an end goal in mind, so that makes sense. All this took place shortly before the lockdown we were told about by Molly began. She says they've been trapped for several days now, and people are starting to go a bit buck mad and trying to escape the lab, which, fair play, if you were in prison for mandatory overtime, you'd be doing the same. Yeah? This actually may explain the hole in the wall of the clean room, as apparently they tried to cut a hole through it. They hit some hardened outer wall, but the damage seems to have weakened it such that, over time, it came down. A call for more creative escape solutions seems to have caused a light bulb moment for Erica. The dosing patterns seem to rely on nanoholes that lie perpendicular to the surface on which they're being applied, but now she instead wants to angle them, with the hope it will reflect particles coming directly at the armor, and only absorb the ones coming at an angle. She believes this may help the thermal dissipation issues. Her, and two others called Tom and Miri, are going to gather some materials together and test this theory. This, however, never actually works out, and they never get those samples. The last entry lays it all out. Will Bergman, one of the founders, has apparently went well off the deep end and locked himself in a lab. They're trying to hack into the systems controlling the lockdown, and they sealed off one of the rooms, the reactor, where the U-238, which we need, is kept. They also locked Miri in there as well, and we'll also see that soon. His 3D chess move is to convince the lab systems the lab's been breached, lifting the lockdown. This will also activate all of the automated systems as well, which will then target them. Now, I wonder why it just treats everyone as a trespasser, as presumably these systems would be expected to deal with trespassers when other workers are still present in the lab, as we shall see. We also learn he has some military training, and is going to lean on that to get himself out, though that's not really going to help against a turret. This is the other way out of the lab, if you don't want to finish the experiment. Will refuses to listen to Erica, and just wants to do it his way. I do kind of see, however, why he doesn't believe he'll be let out, as he may not know the true reason why they're being kept here, just yet, and as far as he knows, his boss just went mental. They're going to go through the crawl space and try and get into his lab from there. However, this does raise the question of why this wasn't a possible option to get out of the lab in the first place. The last set of entries can be found in the internal mail relay, and consist of 3 sets of entries, with the oldest being at the bottom. It's in regards to the mandatory overtime. While this is the mandatory overtime that resulted in the lab being locked, they either don't seem to be aware of it, or it hasn't actually happened yet. He's trying to placate them with coffee, donuts, and something called Spuckies, which I can't recall that's a pizza place, or we've actually never heard of it. Apparently Colonel Kemp has told the director there will be some military drills, and if they hear anything weird later, it's all fine, nothing to be concerned about. Just keep working, oh valued employee. Well, that's all a big lie, and John is a total Judas, as his next entry clearly shows. He sent a confidential message to his wife, presumably later in the day after this one. He has apparently locked them in, although maybe they didn't think it was weird up until this point. The colonel told him it would be a good idea to keep them all in the lab, and the reason was because this was Saturday, the 23rd of October, the day the bombs hit. He references what I assume was the primary detonation in the glowing sea, although it's hard to say. Now, he did manage to reach out to the military, and he was able to arrange an extraction team, but only if they finished the project. However, this sort of makes the timeline a little fuzzy, as this is presumably the same day as the previous entry, so how all this unfolded in such a short period of time is uncertain, but more on all of that later. He tells her he loves her, and she can do this, and this is in fact his wife, although we don't find that out until later. The final entry is from the military man himself, Will, and it's a little odd, in that we actually get a date for this entry. The 16th of January, 2078. Now, from our previous entries, Will was kicking off about all this just a few days after they got locked in, but this entry claims it's almost 3 months later. I'm not sure if this is correct, given what they talk about, but it's hard to gauge. The isotope containment is apparently leaking, which explains where they kept some of the samples. He has given up on the cleanroom controls, as he knows he can get them open anyway, because the facility robots need to get into the lab to attack intruders. Although we only have to deal with the one, so no clue where the rest are. Also not sure how he planned to fight out, as there is a distinct shortage of weapons in here. He finishes by saying he's going to deal with John, which likely means kill him. I still don't think he knows the truth of the situation outside. So yeah, a lot went on here. They were under a certain deadline to finish this project, and increasing pressure to do so. This likely stemmed from the mounting tension worldwide due to the conflict, which the Colonel was aware of. He seems to have warned John to some extent, and this led to the mandatory overtime. Just before this, their solution to the thermal dissipation issue was rejected, as it would make the coating unsuitable for power armor. However, once they were properly locked in when the bombs dropped, John was using Erica to try and keep the peace in the lab. This seems to have failed overall as people started to mount escape attempts. This culminated in Will threatening to activate the defense systems, putting them all in danger and opening the clean room. However, Erica seems to think she came up with a solution, and it's this solution that we need to try and implement to get out of the lab. Now, in order to test this, we need to make our way through the facility and get the lithium hydride, gold, and the U-238, and place them in the machine next to her terminal. Using it, we need to gather various unidentified samples, place them in the correct order, lithium hydride left and gold right, and the U-238 on the far right. After this, we can then finish the research, the fruits of which we are definitely going to hoard for ourselves. Now, on to the rest of the facility. So heading out of that lab, we can see the place is in pretty bad shape. The stairs have somewhat collapsed, part of the floor is flooding, and there's desks piled up everywhere, which seems to be related to the lab above, as we'll discuss. And there's also quite a lot of ghouls here, although they died quite quickly due to the security system here, which is a little odd, but we will cover that at the end. Heading across the room, we can reach a supply closet that has a radiation suit you will likely need due to the shenanigans with the reactor. Also in here is unknown sample 3111, one of the 5 samples in this lab that need to be collected to find the gold and lithium hydride. The lab next to this is where we need to go to unlock the isotope containment, which, as we're told by Will, was leaking radiation, so a possible explanation for the ghouls. To the right before the collapsed wall, that is our only entry into that room, we can find sample 413, and through the broken wall, opposite the terminal we need to access, we get sample 65. Now this terminal is what we need to use to get access to the U-238. After doing so, the alarms start going off. We wake up a glowing one that's just been having a siesta inside all of that irradiated water. Now, while you watch the miraculous pathfinding abilities of Fallout's AI, let's talk about this. As far as we know, one person was locked in here, Miri. Now, since things don't seem to have went the desired way, as we shall read, and given the room is still locked, I'm inclined to believe the skeleton here is Miri. They got stuck in here, trapped by Will, when they went to get the U-238. However, they just seem to have died either from starvation or just exposure to all the radioactive materials in here. This then raises the problem of where this ghoul came from. We can discuss the others, and we will, but as far as we know, the door's been locked ever since Will locked it, and nothing indicates otherwise. So how did somebody else get in here and be turned, or a ghoul get in and transform into a glowing one over time? It's honestly quite odd, and while I can reason out the other ghouls here, somewhat, this one is a bit of an enigma. Anyway, we get the isotope on the other side of the room, and we can make our way upstairs to see what became of everyone else here. Heading up the rack stairs, we can head left into a small office area. It's here we find a lot of bones. The majority of the skeletal structure of someone's torso has just been thrown into the bin, and the rest of their bones seem to be thrown around the rest of the office. Let's assume this is done by someone who got lured in here later, as it's very creepy if there's actually a full torso someone cut up and binned. There's some discarded cans of food in the bins as well, and opposite that torso, a full skeleton by a desk. Now the who of this is unknown to us, as we can be fairly sure that it wasn't the person who owned the terminal, as we've already accounted for their whereabouts. So, either a dead employee, or someone from the outside who didn't manage to get out. The terminal belongs to Miri, and there's only one entry of interest located on the internal mail relay. It's the follow-up to the mandatory overtime entry, which is just the same one we saw before. It's titled Lockdown Status, and does occur after it's become apparent John has locked them all in, and so after the bombs have fallen, likely killing all of the loved ones of the people here. He tries to justify it by saying finishing the project is mandatory, like that isn't going to rustle everyone's jimmies. This just comes off as very stupid, like he knows the world is ending, they don't, so what must they think when they hear him say you can all go home when I get what I want? Obviously, they'd want to kill him. He's still making an attempt to pass all this off as a military drill, which are the signs of society going full-on Mad Max and tearing itself apart, which unfortunately has consequences for John. He then tries the patriotic approach, just in case everybody wasn't already frothing at the mouth with rage. Just a bit of an asshole all round. I mean, given what he's dealing with, as we shall find out later, I kind of get it. But still. Heading across to the other side, we can see 2 docks for Protectrons, but this implies the lab already had robots present in it, so why did the clean room need to be unlocked to let them in from outside? Given they are gone, and the terminal is wrecked, it could be Will disposed of them before he was going to activate the defense protocol, forcing the robots to have to enter from outside. At the far end, we come to another office, and again, it's got a lot of bones strewn around it, as well as a lot of empty cans of food, and other supplies. So this seems to be where some of the staff were still holed up when whatever happened. However, at the far end, we come to a skeleton seated at a desk with sample 49 beside them. But what is interesting, apart from their incredible sense of style, are the mugs and the pot of what looks like tea, along with the can of rat poison beside it. This isn't good. Well, the title of the note tells you immediately what has happened, and the body of it explains the rest. So this is written after the rest of the staff, implying everyone but him tried to get into Will's lab. But apparently he set up a trap with a gun, which I believe we find later on. Erica has died, and the fate of the others is unknown. Now, the radiation was apparently very bad at this point, which is odd as the levels are fine when we arrive. But he has very bad radiation poisoning, and took some poison to go out in his own terms. He tells John he'll see him in hell, and signs off Tom Franklin. So this was the other researcher, apart from Erica and Miri, who wanted to try the final attempt to finish the research, which they do not believe they could finish themselves. At least we get some more context for what likely created the ghouls. Though let's go on and finish the story here before getting into that. Next to Tom, we can find the point where they entered the crawl space. They seem to have collapsed part of the ceiling to make a ramp, and from there, plotted out a route. This leads all the way to the crawl space above the office behind the terminal of Miri, where Will was. You will recall we couldn't actually reach it as the walkway collapsed. Now, this may have been something that happened a long time after all of this, or it was intentional. Recall the desks piled up in the main room, near the only part of the walkway still functioning for that lab. I wonder if this was an attempt to be able to climb up there after it collapsed. It could be recent, or it could have been something done by someone brought in by Molly after, though they're pretty thick if they did all that instead of just using the crawl space. Moving through it, we find a few bones dotted around the place, maybe from the original group, and parts of it are collapsed. At the far end, we do find a full skeleton, and it looks to be a woman's. Given it's directly above the room, and Tom says Erica died, I think it's safe to assume this is her. Now, he said Will rigged a gun, and we do find a pipe pistol down in this room, along with what seems to be left of Will. But does this mean he knew they were going into the crawl space, and rigged the trap in here? I mean, it looks like she was killed in there, and he didn't shoot her, so it must have happened in the crawl space itself. Who the others that came in were, we don't know, or how they died, unless Will did it and then just went back into the room. Which, I mean, it's a bit odd. Now, when we arrive here, the door's still locked. There's a Tesla trap, likely set up by Will, and a ghoul that we can set off, and if we're lucky, get it caught in the trap. Now, there's also a skull posed to eat meat here, so possibly another victim of Will's that he just decided to pose, as there is another skeleton in here as well, but we can get onto this in a minute. First, we can get the final sample, 611, and then take a look at his terminal. The first 3 entries are the various subsystems he was using, or trying to use, while here. The first entry is the subsystem he used to lock down the isotope containment that resulted in the death of Miri. Next is the emergency override you can activate if you want to get out of the facility. Doing this will trigger Molly to be aggressive, and you'll lose an interesting interaction at the end, so I don't recommend it. Also, the turrets will become hostile as well, the wee bastards. The last subsystem controls the clean room, but he never managed to get access to it properly due to John locking him out. Last is a set of entries in the internal mirror relay that we get to flesh out his side of the story. The first of interest is hacking admin, and it's from John. He knows that Will is trying to hack into the admin controls, as he was alerted as soon as he took control of the isotope subsystem. He believes Will is no longer good enough to get around the security protocols as they've been upgraded so much. Now, he says this happened while Will was off playing soldier in Alaska, implying he didn't actually do any real soldiering, as it were. But it also implies that after they graduated and founded the company, Will left for a time to go to Alaska, although we don't know how. Now, the end of the entry is where all of this takes a turn. We get an actual timescale for how long it's been. Erica said people were getting pissed after only a few days, but now, apparently, weeks have passed. So the earlier timestamp for the entry from Will to Erica could be real, and indeed months have passed by the time he tried to initiate the defense system, which is a bit odd as the attempt to break through the cleanroom wall was only a few days in the lockdown, and he wanted to try something new back then, so why did it take so many months? We'll need to try and piece together a full timeline at the end. The last entry is from Erica about the isotope containment, and she's trying to convince Will not to trigger the facility breach protocol, so apparently it actually does just label everyone an intruder, which seems like a very poor oversight, as it's already shown itself capable of telling employees apart from intruders. Additionally, we again hear about the robots, yet we only have to deal with the one, Molly, after she decides our performance is lacking and tries to just take our head off. Also the turrets. Overall, she raises a very good point. they're all likely to die. Although it's possibly a better way to go out than slow radiation poisoning, which did seem to be the alternative. The deleted mail section gives us an escalating snapshot of what was happening here over these months in the lab. The first appears to be the new dosing pattern, although I don't think this is the one Erica had the idea for. I say this as the next two entries from Reed and Harvey seem to be about cutting through the clean room wall, and the pattern that actually worked wasn't discovered until after this. The final two echo that at least some of the people here thought this is a bad idea, although it was just Tom and Mary, and we already know where those two stood with all this. Although I thought his idea to use the defense system came after he had locked Mary in the containment room. So how did she leave this entry then? Overall, Will seems to have snapped after what seems like over 2 months of being trapped here. At no point does he reference the war outside, so he seems to think this is all John's doing. We'll have to wait to see if anyone else actually knew the truth. He had a pipe pistol, at least, as there is one in the room here, and Erica was confirmed to be shot, so something had to have done the shooting. But the real question, and the one that leads into the oddness here, is whether or not this ghoul was him. So the first thing is what the Christ is going on with all these ghouls. By my count, including the glowing one in the containment room, the good Lord knows how it got there. There's 11 ghouls in here. Now the defense system here starts wasting them, which is great for us. Additionally, it isn't hostile to us, as we're identified as an employee. But this raises several issues. Where did these ghouls come from, and how are they alive? I don't mean why they haven't died from old age, or something like that. I mean this defense system in here definitely sees them as intruders. But it isn't on the breach mode where it just decides to kill everything. We can do that later. So presumably these turrets have still been active this whole time. So how have these ghouls avoided getting shot? Were they just completely inactive until we came here? We do know they go through long periods of inactivity, even hibernation, one could call it. But they should still be detected by the turrets. I mean, some of them are just lying out in the open. Now some are tucked behind various things, and the glowing one not being dead makes sense, as they were stuck in the containment chamber. But overall, where do they come from? We know of Will, Erica, Mary, and Tom, and also an Ann Stokes, L. Reed, and J. Harvey. So there were at least 7 workers here. We can confirm at least Mary's body in the chamber, Tom in his chair, Erica in the vent, and 1 more body by the clean room, so 4 overall. That leaves 3 more, but the amount of skeletons in here just don't match up. We find 1 more full one by Mary's terminal, and the amount of other parts of skeletons gives us more than 2 more people. On top of all of that, we then have the ghouls. Now we know the radiation was clearly bad enough that Tom was dying, so it isn't a total stretch to say the others may have died of it as well. But the ghoul numbers are just too high. They couldn't have gotten in, as the lab seems to be completely sealed. This just leaves the other people lured in here. They eventually succumbed to the radiation that was leaking, and turned. Now of course this doesn't explain why the turrets didn't take them out, as they would have been wandering around to some degree, presumably, before they settled down for their extended naps. This might also account for some of the other skeletons we see. People who died either to the ghouls here, or just being trapped for as long as they were. I think the ghoul in the lab is likely Will. If Tom was dying of radiation exposure, then he could have turned and remained trapped. It's a bit of a mystery why he never then triggered the Tesla trap. The only explanation would be the posed head was his, and the ghoul was someone who managed to make it that far, and then turned. All that's left is to take the 2 options to get out, finish the research, or trigger the defense system. I recommend you don't do that, as I mentioned, you miss an interesting piece of dialogue at the end. Now to finish the research. When we bring the sample back and load the fabrication routine, a power armor chest piece is transported through a laser array on a conveyor belt, and deposited in front of us. This is the Piezonucleic power armor chest. Now it has an ability somewhat related to its goal of converting radiation to electrical energy. It increases your AP refresh when you're exposed to radiation. Overall, a nice reward for a short quest. But the real reward is we're free, and we can finally get out of the lab. Going back to Molly, we can tell her we have finished the research and she wants to bring us to see John Elwood himself. This will surely turn out well.
I have been instructed to inform you that Director Elwood has issued mandatory overtime due to uncompleted milestones. Have you completed the research on the Piezonucleic lining project?
The prototype is done.
Wonderful. Mandatory overtime mode disengaged. Clean room override disengaged. The director will want to see this immediately. Please, follow me. This is Director Elwood's office. I expect he will be quite excited to see the prototype. prototype. I must apologize for the director. He hasn't been himself lately. Must be the office flu. Payroll systems indicate that I have been authorized to provide you with a completion bonus at this time. Here is your bonus, minus taxes and benefits. Unfortunately, due to a lack of current projects, we must lay off redundant staff members at this time. This is not a reflection on your work, and we will be happy to provide you with a positive reference. Shutting down.
Well, yeah, that just happened. Just give me a second to process everything here. So first off, John is a ghoul. We'll get into the how of that in a moment here. But it would appear he turned and has been in his office the whole time. I say this as Molly immediately attacks him, as do the turrets. So if he was out and about after the other staff had died, he'd be killed. Second, it's typical we get laid off in this economy after we put all that work in. Now it appears that Molly did have some knowledge of the current state of the company, or just the amount of time that had passed. That, once the priority protocol of the research was done, she shut it all down. Very sudden, to be honest. Third, all we had to do was tell her it was done. Unless she was checking the lining device, which, if she was, then why did she have to ask us? She had no idea we were telling the truth. Couldn't the staff have lied? Or was it just the case that she took over after John had went feral? It's hard to say, but now we have one last mystery to solve. Why did John do all of this, and what happened to him? Heading into the room, we can see a desk with a terminal and a radio on it. There are also a lot of empty tins of food, just strewn around the place. Now we know John was still here the whole time when the team was, or at least he was for a while, so this appears to be where he was set up, consuming supplies and watching them through the viewing window. A window, by the way, that seems like it would be easier to get through than a reinforced cleanroom door, so why didn't they try and climb up there and get out that way? As discussed, I don't believe the pile of desks was for that, as they weren't beside the wall. Well, now to find out what John was doing the whole time. Thankfully, we aren't kept in suspense, and we can take a look at his terminal to get an answer to all of our questions. It has a variety of options. The first is the cleanroom subsystem. This explains how he was taking control and keeping them locked in. The personal logs give us a lot of background as to what happened on this side of the lab. The first entry is titled Call from Camp, and it appears to have come on the day of the war, given the next few entries. The Colonel responded quite oddly, at least from John's perspective, to reports they were behind schedule, and just told him to keep the team working in the lab today. He thinks the Colonel's trying to tell him something, but he doesn't know what. This also confirms the team was already working here on Saturday overnights, which we already seen entries about. Well, he quickly finds out what the Colonel was trying to tell him in the next entry ominously titled, It was a warning. The bombs hit and it's knocked out all their external communications. Now he says the lab was built to withstand anything, but I mean, there's ordinary buildings that are just fine near this one that were presumably not built to these specs, so it isn't like this actually needed to be the case. This is when he made the choice to lie to the team about the exercises, and had already started to take control of the cleanroom. Which, I mean, there's a chance their families are still alive, so I feel like they should have had the option to leave and go get them. He says he needs to get a ham radio to contact the Colonel, which explains why he had one on the desk. How he actually got it is explained in the next entry. In it, titled We Have to Finish the Project, we get a rare look at things immediately after the bombs. Apparently they're mostly fine, which is one of those things in the lore that's always been a bit contradictory, or at least inconsistent. I mean, the bombs hit so close to here, and yet so much is left standing. Anyway, he managed to get some supplies, which are the cans left here, and a radio, but he got shot making his way back. Also, why is he calling it looting? I think the concept of having to legally pay for goods went out the window when society did, my lad. He's also got radiation sickness, so at least the levels were high enough to be harmful, as they definitely should be. This explains how he eventually ended up turning into a ghoul. The military's told him that the only way they'll spare resources to come and get him and his team is if they finish the project, as it has strategic significance. They also say it's vital to the war effort, so the military seems to have persisted in this region to some extent. This was his reason for keeping them in the dark going forward, because it was the only way they'd be kept safe. Of course, there was no guarantee that things wouldn't fall apart to such an extent that this would no longer be feasible, either. The entry after this is ominously titled, Can't Hold Out Much Longer. It first gives us a glimpse into some of what was going on in the lab, and it's all gone wrong. The reactor was damaged in the initial blast, and it's leaking more and more, putting everyone down there at risk. As we have now seen, several people were dead or dying due to it, and it seems they have turned quite a few people into ghouls. We get the information about Will starting to hack the administrative controls. However, his efforts on this side to contain all these problems are for naught, as his shoulder wound is getting worse, going septic in his opinion, and he doesn't believe he can keep holding out. This turns out to be true in his final entry, Erica, please read. He is leaving this to her as a goodbye, hoping that when she reads it, it's because the project has been finished, and she's contacted the military to come and pick them up. He says he did all this to protect her, which I believe is true. I don't believe he was thinking about any of the other staff, however, and didn't seem to care that he was forcing them to work so he could guarantee the safety he wanted for his wife. But he seems to have succumbed to the radiation poisoning shortly after this, although we now know he didn't die. How long this all took again is a bit odd. He made the choice to lock down the lab so quickly that he seems to have gotten the radio within a few days. But we know people were here for months, and some of the entries we have read, and will read, seem to indicate he actually lasted quite a while, but an exact timeline is hard to pin down. The final thing is the internal mail relay. Most of them are from his wife, Erica, updating him on all the current nonsense going on in the lab. They go from the bottom up, I believe, so we'll start with confidential. This seems to be just after he made the choice to lock them all in so they could finish the work and therefore get the extraction team. The project has been running into the same wall for several weeks. As mentioned before, the nanoweave they've been using is continuing to fall apart. Even if she could figure out a solution, it would take days to implement. Days that they have to continue making everyone believe it's an exercise outside, and not the post-nuclear purge. She does hit the nail on the head. It's definitely not right, and incredibly selfish. The only counter is all of their families are probably already dead. Now again, we see the inconsistency of some of the events seeming to take place over weeks, but she thinks people will find out in a few days. Next is dramatically titled, He's Locked Us Out, and Wildcard Will has executed the plan. The lad, after they actually solved the problem, has thrown the toys out of the pram and derailed everything. He's locked himself in the lab, and locked them out of where they need to get samples from. Only now has everyone actually been told what's going on, and by some miracle, they chose not to kill her. She needs John to take back system control from Will, or they can't finish the project. But this confirms that Will doesn't seem to have known about the bombs dropping. The entry after this is from the man himself, Will Bergman, who is apparently late. He's going to use the automated defense system to get out. As we saw, this doesn't seem to have actually happened. He's using the possible death of John's wife as a threat, and as we know, this is what happens. Although the question of what happened to Will still remains. He did die somehow, and he never triggered the defenses, as far as we know. But then again, given the possibility of him becoming a ghoul, and the others in the lab apart from Erica, there were other ways he could have died. The last entry seems to be when the wound finally got him. Apparently they can't see him moving around anymore, and this implies this is after his last entry, and he's become a ghoul. Though he should still be moving around to some extent, I'd have thought. This seems to be months after this all started, and this is where they're going to try and ambush Will from the ceiling, stop him triggering the defenses and getting them all killed. We saw how that went down, with Erica not surviving, although how she died is still a bit of a mystery. Will shooting her does seem likely, but the how of him getting the gun is still there. And again, they thought of crawl through the ceiling before smash a window. Whatever, they're all dead. The last thing is the deleted mail entries, where we see the escalating responses to their predicament. It seems like they didn't know why they were locked in until the final entry, but they still could have been in the dark even then, and just wanted him to know he's a bastard, which is fair, he kind of was. How they managed to be kept in the dark this long is still unbelievable, unless it took weeks between Will planning to trigger the defenses, them deciding to go through the crawl space, and them actually doing it, but this seems unlikely. So due to the delays with the project, the team was working overtime on Saturday when John got a strange communication from the email. The bombs then hit and society went mad, scavenging outside and almost dying in the process. John managed to contact the military and get a deal in place. If they finished, they would be extracted. So he locked the team in the lab and seemed to pass it off as mandatory overtime for, I guess, a few months. Now depending on the timeline, things fell apart slowly or quickly, and honestly there's quite a bit of inconsistency with all this. Eventually, one of the founders, Will, decided to trigger the defense system so the lockdown would be lifted, and the lab opened. However, this would activate the turrets and robots, and they would all likely die. I don't believe this ever happened, however. During all of this, the isotope containment was leaking radiation due to damage by the blast, and people were getting sick. Tom took his own way out because of this. Mary seems to have died locked in the containment room. Erica died from whatever trap it was that Will had set up, and Will's fate is a bit of an unknown. The rest of them, however many there actually were, likely went out from starvation or radiation poisoning. Somewhere along the line, John became a ghoul, and given he never seems to have left the office, I assume he went feral incredibly quickly. I'm not saying I agree with what he did, but at least on some level, he was protecting them all from what was happening outside, and he did have a way for them to get out to safety. However, it was against their will, and they were deprived of the chance to be with their loved ones, who still could have survived. So while he didn't deserve to end up a ghoul, given all the others didn't have much of a better end. It only seems fair. So after all this, what do we think? Out of all of them, I'd say Peters was the most noble. Even before the world ended, she was still prepared to risk her own life and safety to make it better. Yes, the argument could be made and she expected it to work, so she thought it would all work out. But she didn't know that for sure. Moreover, she had to suffer before all of that, and to a much greater degree than most do. However, whether she died of radiation poisoning or turned into a ghoul and persisted this whole time, her end wasn't great. Arcjet was just struggling to stay afloat amid tough economic times. I won't say that Thomas was the bad guy initially, as that isn't true. He had employees to worry about and had to maintain the company, or they'd all be out of a job. But his descent into paranoia, resulting in a 180 in his personality in the end, wasn't warranted, and it may have cost Dr. McClellan their life. Hallucigen gets no consolation prize. The company was peddling snake oil for most of its products, and was very upfront about not caring what happened to either the test subjects they lied to, or the workers they employed. The only good thing to come out of their whole mess is what they did to the gunners. Dylan didn't deserve what happened to him, if that was him dead by the terminal. He was just curious, even though there were plenty of warnings in the holotape as to what this Sentry bot could possibly be capable of. But it doesn't harm us, so it remains a mystery why it killed him. Lastly, John, however well intentioned, ignored his workers' wishes, kept them against their will, and kept most of them in the dark as to why. This led to unnecessary deaths, and really, once the containment started leaking, he should have pulled the plug on the whole thing. Overall, all of these were excellent examples of how pre-war research, even with the best of intentions, could still come with the same cost and suffering and lives as many of the post-war stories we end up looking at.